Chapter 258. Tineno did not struggle. She quietly lay beside Yang Fan. Her face was covered in dust, her complexion haggard, and her chapped lips were bloodshot. However, she still looked delicate and delicate. "Erlang, don't waste your energy," she suddenly spoke. Her voice was very clear, and there was no longer that feeling of stupidity. Yang Fan could not help but turn his head to look at her. The confusion and fear in Tin Eno's eyes had disappeared. Her eyes seemed to have recovered their clarity. She raised her face and looked at the gloomy sky, listening to the whistling wind. She suddenly smiled at Yang Fan. Her smile was very peaceful. "We are really going to die." This time Yang Fan did not refute her words. He only stubbornly moved over and hugged her body. He wanted to pull her up, but his strength was almost exhausted. "Erlang, do you know?" And Yang Fan lowered his head. Tin Eno weakly nestled in his arms. She gently raised her hand and caressed his cheeks that had been polished by the sand. She weakly said, "Do you know, I think I like you." Yang Fan wanted to smile, but he could only grin. He felt a burst of pain from his chapped lips. His cheeks were so numb that he could no longer smile. "It's true." Tin Eno leaned into his arms and closed her eyes. She softly said, "I have never cared about someone so much. I worry about him, miss him, like to know about him, like to inquire about him, like to look at him, like to think about him," Tin Eno said to this point. She gently opened her eyes and gazed at Yang Fan. She softly said, "This is probably what it means to like someone. Erlang, do like me just a little bit?" Yang Fan nodded his head. He nodded his head forcefully. Tin Eno smiled. That little face covered in dust. When she smiled, it was like a quietly blooming epiphyllum. It was quiet and holy. "I once said, people don't love slaves. Tin Eno. But today, even the heavens don't love me." Tin Eno slightly turned her head to look at the gray sky. She then turned to Yang Fan. She gazed at his face. Her fingers gently rubbed the stubble on his chin. She quietly said, "Fortunately, there is still you who love me. You really love me, right?" Yang Fan nodded his head forcefully. His throat was dry and his eyes were hot. The Tian AI heaved a sigh of relief and said softly, "I can't do it anymore. You should leave by yourself. I only beg you to bury me. Bury me deep. I don't want to be eaten by humans or birds. I'm scared. I'm really scared." Under the sand dune, Eno had fallen asleep. In the past few days, she had not slept at all. When she had completely given up, the demon in her heart was no longer effective. She had already calmly accepted death. She was only asleep and breathing weakly. But once she slept, it was very likely that she would never wake up. Yang Fan hugged her tightly in his arms. He wanted to cry, but had no tears. Yang Fan gently put Tin Eno down. He took out the knife from his waist. He wanted to dig a deep hole while he still had some strength. He wanted to bury both him and Tin Eno inside. Many years ago, when he was still a child, he had dug a grave for Nuno's mother. The sorrow he felt then was completely different. Now he was digging a grave for himself. Many years ago, when he was still a child, he had once dug the grave for Nuno's mother. The sorrow at that time was completely different from his current mood. Now he was digging his own grave. Cha! 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 In the moaning wind, there was only the sound of the cold blade stabbing into the sand. It was dry, monotonous, and cold. The wind seemed to soften. It blew on his face. It was slightly cold. It was not cold. It was really a kind of chill. Yang Fan gently wiped his cheeks with the back of his palm. He felt a touch of wetness. "Did I cry?" Yang Fan stopped the knife and raised his face. Another piece of something stuck to his cheeks. It quickly turned into a wet mark. Yang Fan was stunned. After a while, he suddenly dropped the knife and climbed up the sand dune with his hands and feet. Yang Fan climbed up the sand dune, gasping for breath. The wind blew against his face, making him feel cold. It was really cold, damp and moist. A snowflake hit his face again. Yang Fan touched his cheeks and suddenly laughed. He laughed and rolled down the sand dune. He rushed to Tin Ano's side. He picked her up and shouted, "Anu! It's snowing! It's snowing! We are at the edge. Let's go out! Anu!" Anu's body seemed to be frozen stiff. No matter how loudly Yang Fan shouted, she still didn't speak or move. Her consciousness had already fallen asleep, apart from an undetectable wisp of breath. She was now no different from a corpse. Yang Fan patted her frozen face and shouted, "Anu! Anu!" Tin Ano still did not respond. She was very hungry, thirsty, and sleepy. She no longer had to worry about the fear of not having food. She wanted to sleep in a world without hunger. The snow was really coming. It was getting heavier and heavier. Some snowflakes were blown by the wind and rolled into the sand valley. Although it was not much, it brought hope. But Tin Ano still did not wake up. Tin Ano fell asleep. She could no longer feel the cold, the hunger, the thirst, or the fear. In her dream, she vaguely returned to her carefree childhood. She happily chased the chickens in the yard, making them squeak as they ran around. Her mother chased after her with a bowl of hot porridge. She laughed and scolded her angrily, telling her to stop eating. She suddenly smelled a fragrant aroma and immediately felt hungry, so she obediently stopped eating. The porridge was very fragrant and sweet. She held the bowl and swallowed the porridge in big mouthfuls. Suddenly, a swarm of locusts flew over. The ground cracked, and the trees were all eaten. There was not a single drop of porridge left in the bowl. The whole yard was ruined and empty. No. Tin Ano screamed and opened her eyes. Then she found that she was still lying in the cold desert in Yang Fan's arms. Yang Fan was half squatting, holding her. His wrist was right next to her mouth. Tin Ano felt a fishy and sweet taste in her mouth. It was the taste of blood. You! Tin Ano suddenly understood. He is saving me. He cut his wrist and used his blood to save me. Yang Fan saw that she woke up and was pleasantly surprised. "Anu! We are saved. We are already at the edge. Look, it's snowing. There are really snowflakes." Tin Ano did not look at the sky at all, nor did she feel if there were snowflakes. She threw herself into Yang Fan's arms and burst into tears. She was not afraid of death. What she was afraid of was not hunger. What she was afraid of was the kind of family and humanity that had been completely wiped out by hunger. In that hunger, people turned into beasts. They ate others, and even ate their own relatives. She could not forget the helplessness, fear, sadness, and despair when she was pushed into the dry well by her father. That scene became an unconquerable heart demon that had been buried deep in her heart. At this moment, that heart demon was finally completely destroyed by Yang Fan's blood. The ice in her heart finally melted. These were tears of joy. Tears of the knot in her heart was finally untied. The heavy burden that had been pressing on her heart was finally relieved. She cried her heart out, as if all the years of suffering had been poured out at this moment, exhausted. The two of them stood up again and supported each other as they walked towards the direction where the snowflakes were coming from. In fact, there were two things that Yang Fan did not understand. One was that his blood could not quench Tin Ano's thirst. It was not the problem of the salt in the blood that people usually thought. How much salt was there in the blood? More than 90% of it was water. The problem was that unless you cut your artery and poured all your blood into someone else's, that little bit of water was not enough to save a person's life. However, Tin Ano's was mainly broken. When the warm blood woke her up, when she saw that Yang Fan was willing to give up his life for her, the knot in her heart was untied, and she also had the will and courage to live. The second thing that Yang Fan did not know was that it was not always snowing in the desert. The snowy area might not necessarily be at the edge of the desert, but fortunately, they had indeed walked to the edge of the desert. The two of them supported each other and walked for half the night. The sand under their feet was white, and there was already a layer of snow. They ate some snow, replenished their water and strength, and continued walking. When the two of them could not hold on any longer, their feet stepped on solid ground. In front of them was a desert, and there was a yurt in the desert. The two of them almost fell on the soft snow at the same time, and their hearts immediately calmed down. Flying Fox Pass was the first pass of the Turks' southern invasion of Longyu. The Baiting army had a total of 15,000 soldiers, of which 5,000 were stationed at Flying Fox Pass, and the other 10,000 were stationed at Mingwei Garrison. In front of Mingwei Garrison were two lakes, Xiutu Swamp and Riding Sea, which were connected to Liangzhou through the Makung River. The Great Wall was built at Mingwei Garrison according to the geographical situation. This was the first solid line of defense for the Liangzhou army. However, there were two lakes in front of Mingwei Garrison, and the surrounding water and grass were very lush. Some small tribes that belonged to the Tang dynasty lived here, so the Tang army extended the first line of defense to Flying Fox Pass. Unless a large Turkic army arrived, small troops or horse bandits would not be able to enter and raid the border residents. The Flying Fox Pass was a gap formed by the Helan mountain range. As the gap was relatively large, the terrain on both sides of the pass was relatively flat. If one wanted to build a castle here to connect the two mountains, it would require a huge amount of manpower and resources, as well as a lot of money. Therefore, no one had built a castle here. Otherwise, Liangzhou's first line of defense would have been established here long ago. The two mountains in Flying Fox Pass had a military camp with 5,000 soldiers, specially set up to deal with small raiding Turkic tribes and horse bandits. The commander in charge was an Yingyang lieutenant general named Su Yixing. Lieutenant General Su Yixing was in his early 30s, with handsome features and 3 strands of mustache on his chin. He looked elegant and had the demeanor of a scholarly general. At this moment, Su Yixing had his hands behind his back, suspiciously walking around a few Turkic men who were tied up in front of him. These men dressed in Turkic attire were Gao Sheiji, Big Bear, Yanjiha, and the others. Chapter 259. Gao Shichikin's hands were tied behind his back, and he anxiously said, "Commander Su, everything we said is true. Didn't you check our waist tags?" Commander Su waved his hand and said, "Whether you are really our scouts or not, we will know when the people from Shanzhou come to verify it. Don't worry, before the truth is known, I will only restrict your freedom and will not mistreat you." Gao Shichikin anxiously said, "The Turkic army is traveling day and night and will arrive in no time. They are all cavalry and are not much slower than us. There is no place to defend here. The garrison must quickly retreat to Mingwei Garrison." Commander Su chuckled coldly and said, "Your waist tokens are real, but how do I know that you didn't capture our scouts and impersonate them to lure this general away so that you can plunder the local shepherds? I have the responsibility to defend the land. How can I abandon my duty just because of a few words from you?" Big Bear stamped his feet and said, "If Commander Su is worried about this, you can immediately inform all the big and small tribes to move back to Mingwei Garrison. These tribes have all left. If we are thieves, what can we rob?" Commander Su rolled his eyes and said, "Do you think it is so easy to migrate the tribes? If the news is not true, who will appease the tribes and compensate them? Who will answer to the superior's questions? Who will bear the responsibility of leaving without permission?" Yan Jiha was not a soldier, but he did not care how high his rank was. He angrily said, "Bullsh, *T. We took such a big risk to deliver the news to you, and you, a dog official, still have doubts. Aren't you afraid that the news is true, and when the Turkic army arrives, they will swallow all of you in one bite?" Commander Su angrily pointed at his nose and said, "Bastard, you dare to speak to a superior like this?" Yan Jiha puffed out his chest and said, "I am not your subordinate. Why should I be afraid of you?" "Who are you?" "I am a horse bandit." Commander Su's eyes suddenly revealed a fierce light. Gao Shichikin hurriedly said, They were called over by us to help. Commander Su smiled and said, "Aren't you a scout? When did our scouts become so extravagant that they actually had the money to bribe the horse bandits?" Big Bear angrily rolled his eyes. Stamping his feet, he said, "We can't explain these things in a short time. But I do know that the Turkic army is about to arrive. If we don't retreat now, it will be too late." Commander Su sneered. 2 days ago, this commander received news that the Turks had truly launched an attack on our border army. The Koshiki's eyes lit up, and he hurriedly asked, "You already know?" Commander Su proudly declared, "Of course, the Turks are attacking GNC, not White Pavilion." "Humph. Are you trying to fish in troubled waters?" Gao Shi Chicken was dumbfounded. After a while he said, "Didn't I tell you just now that they were pretending to attack GNC? Why did you still fall for it?" Su Langjiang sneered and pointed at them, saying, "You are telling me not to believe in the fire beacon signal, but to believe in the words of the few of you who are unknown highwaymen, scouts, or spies of the Turks." Commander Su did not wait for him to reply. With a stern face, he waved his hand and said, "Arrest them and send them to the Liang Prefecture to be dealt with." The soldiers waiting in the tent immediately dragged Gao Shi Chicken and the others away. Gao Shi Chicken anxiously jumped and shouted, "Commander Su! Commander Su! No matter what, you should send someone to investigate the situation. Commander Su!" The tent was empty. Commander Su paced around with his hands behind his back and called, "Guards!" A personal guard entered the tent and cupped his fists. "Commander Su!" Su Yixing said, "Send a few brothers to the mountain pass to investigate." Deputy General Xiao Ningfing asked, "Commander Su believes their words?" Commander Su said in a deep voice, "This is a serious matter. It is better to believe than not. Send a few men to the mountain to take a look." Tin Ano slowly woke up and felt a strong warmth hitting her face. She opened her eyes and saw a bonfire not far in front of her. Yang Fan sat beside the bonfire and was putting 2 pieces of dried cow dung into the fire. The flickering light from the fire reflected on his face, sometimes bright and sometimes dark, as if it was shining on the blade of a knife. After more than 2 months of being tempered by the wind and sand in the snowy plains and desert, after so long of wandering, Yang Fan had lost a lot of weight. However, because of this, his entire person was refined and his aura was somewhat sharp. His hair was unkempt. The messy beard under his chin and sideburns that had not been shaved for a long time added a hint of wildness to his handsomeness. Quietly looking at him, Tin Ano's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of shyness. She remembered the confession she made to Yang Fan before she died. She really wanted to close her eyes and not open them again to avoid the awkwardness when facing him. However, when her gaze swept past Yang Fan's wrist and saw the bandages wrapped around it, she suddenly remembered his injury and couldn't help but let out a soft cry. Yang Fan suddenly turned his head and happily said, "You're awake." Yes. Tin Ano was still dressed neatly, but she still shyly pulled the soft sheepskin coat over her shoulders and said in a low voice, "Your injury, how is it?" Yang Fan said, "It's nothing, just a small injury. When we saw the yurt, you fainted. I also couldn't drag you and had to crawl all the way to the yurt and ask someone to save you. Just now, I fed you a bowl of barley paste. Are you feeling better now?" "Yes." The Tian AI knew, still replied gently and asked, "Where is this place?" Yang Fan said, "This area is already under the jurisdiction of the White Pavilion. This is a Chong tribe. Mu En and Mu Si's armies are taking a different route, so they won't pass through here. However, Zhu Tu's army will definitely pass through here. I want to advise them to evacuate as soon as possible. However, I just talked with them. They don't speak Chinese very well, and I don't understand their language." "I can do that." Tin Ano turned around and sat up. After thinking for a moment, she said, "The Chong people who live in the White Pavilion area are quite loyal to the Tang dynasty. Where is their leader? I'll go see him." Tin Ano struggled to stand up, but Yang Fan hurriedly supported her and said, "Don't worry, they roughly understood a few words and have already gone to find their leader." Hearing this, Tin Ano relaxed and sat down. Her body was still rather weak, and whenever she stood up, her ears would ring and her heart would race. Right now, it was indeed not suitable for her to exercise. Hearing that this was a Chong tribe that belonged to the White Pavilion, Tin Ano was not worried. The Chong people were a large ethnic group in the western regions. In fact, their population was even larger than the Tuyuhan or Turkic kingdoms. However, the Chong people did not have a unified government and were very loosely organized. In order to fight for control of the plains, the various Chong tribes constantly fought against each other. As a result, they were later ruled by the Tuyuhan and Turkic tribes. The Chong people and Turkic tribes had always been at odds, and the Tuyuhan people and Chong people had also been at odds. However, the Tuyuhan kings gradually tried to integrate and win over the Chong people. Later on, when the Tang people fought with the Tuyuhan people, many of the Chong tribes killed the Tang officials and defected to the Tuyuhan people. The Tang people could not be considered harmonious here. However, the Tuyuhan people had already been annexed by the Tuyuhan people, and even the Tuyuhan royal family had been reduced to second-class citizens. The Tuyuhan people were no longer attractive to the Chong people. At present, the Chong people were the closest to the Han people among the various ethnic groups that remained in the Tang territory. At present, there were many nomadic tribes like the Sogdians, Turks, Tuoins, and Chong people in the Tang territory. The government was trying to change their nomadic habits and get them to try farming. As a result, there were new conflicts between the tribes. It wasn't just the traditional shepherds who couldn't accept it. Even their leaders couldn't accept it because once farming became their main mode of production, their ruling power over the entire tribe would be shaken, and they would be easily taken over by the government. However, this conflict was mainly between the Sogdians and the Turks. The Chong people had been familiar with farming for a long time, and they did not have a strong ruling class like the Turks and the Sogdians. Therefore, among all the ethnic groups in the western regions, the Chong people had the best relationship with the Tang people. Tin Ano sat down again, speechless. She wanted to say something to Yang Fan, but she felt a little shy and did not want to say anything to Yang Fan. The silence in the tent made her panic. It took her a lot of effort to muster up the courage to say something. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, Yang Fan handed her a wooden bowl and said, "Drink some more porridge. There's some meat in it. We've been starving for a few days. Let your stomach get used to it first." Oh, Tin Ano's words were interrupted. She obediently took the wooden bowl and sipped the porridge. She always felt that she should say something to Yang Fan. At least, she had confessed her feelings to Yang Fan. In fact, this feeling had always been hazy in her heart. It was not until the moment of death that it suddenly became clear. And now, she had already told Yang Fan about it, and Yang Fan had nodded his head vigorously. She remembered this scene very clearly. She always felt that the relationship between the two of them was a little different from before, but she didn't know why. She felt that she and Yang Fan seemed to have become more distant. In the past, when she saw Yang Fan would always find an opportunity to flirt with her. But now that they had crossed the desert together, drank together, slept in each other's arms, and after that confession at the moment of death, he should be closer to her. Why did he seem to be avoiding her? Tin Ano sipped the porridge and occasionally glanced at Yang Fan. Yang Fan was still facing the fire, adding cow dung and firewood. His expression was no longer as relaxed and natural as before she woke up. His concentration seemed to be an act, as if he was afraid to face her or talk to her. Tin Ano gradually became uneasy. Could it be that he was just brushing me off? Thinking of this, Tin Ano suddenly felt an incomparable panic in her heart. The nightmare of being abandoned and hurt by her loved ones when she was young had always affected her. She did not dare to completely trust anyone, nor did she dare to fall in love with anyone. It was only when she was waiting for death in despair that Yang Fan used his hot blood to lift the curse in her heart. So, Teneno poured all the emotions that she had suppressed for more than 10 years into one person. That love was different from anyone else. It was a kind of fanaticism, a power that she could no longer control. But Yang Fan's attitude made her inexplicably panic. Could it be that he actually doesn't like me? Chapter 260. Teneno was very hungry. The porridge in the bowl was very fragrant, but she suddenly didn't have the appetite to eat. She put down the bowl and stared at the side of Yang Fan's face. She nervously asked, "Erlinyu, right, you still haven't told me. Did you appear in Mo Bay under young Master Zhang's orders?" It seemed like Yang Fan had been waiting for her to speak. The moment Teneno opened her mouth, Yang Fan's question blurted out. He spoke quickly and fluently. Teneno stared at him for a long time until Yang Fan guiltily looked away. Teneno sighed softly in her heart. She had never been an aggressive girl. She knew that Yang Fan was intentionally changing the topic, but she didn't want to ask and didn't dare to. If she didn't ask clearly, she could have a glimmer of hope in her heart. She was worried that if she asked, it would shatter this hope. This girl was never as strong as her appearance showed. In fact, ever since she had cracked open the hard shell that was both hurting and protecting her from new harm, she had become more sensitive and vulnerable than ever before. After a long silence, Teneno softly said, "I told you before, young master and Shinmu belong to a very, very large family. In reality, it is formed by the alliance of several very, very large families. Their goal is to protect the safety of the entire family from the outside and in the dark. Just like if there is a sun, there is a moon. If there is day, there is night. This power is also divided into the light and the dark. Actually, compared to the large families themselves, the light side is also hidden in the dark. It is just that it is not as mysterious and unpredictable as the dark side." Yang Fan quietly listened, and a trace of guilt rose in his heart. Of course, he knew that Teneno had seen through his intentions, but he really didn't know how to face Teneno. Accept her love? Then what about Wan-er? Yang Fan knew that Teneno was a cute girl. Even before he fell in love with Wan-er, he had fantasized about her being his woman more than once. But now that he was asked to accept it, he did not know how to arrange these two women, so he could only escape. Teneno was still explaining. This faction, the one in the light, is called the Obvious Faction, and the sect master is young Master Zhang. Of course, young Master Zhang was just an alias, and so was Shinmu. This hidden faction was called the Hidden Sect, and the patriarch of the Hidden Sect was Shinmu. According to the rules, the Hidden Sect had to obey and assist the Obvious Sect. They would only be asked to do things that the Obvious Sect couldn't do. But Teneno took a light breath and said, "To do things, one must have money, authority, and manpower. If there are some things that even the Obvious Sect couldn't do, then the difficulty of it is imaginable. If the Hidden Sect wants to do these things, they must give them a lot of money, a lot of authority, and a lot of manpower. The Hidden Sect has to maintain its secrecy in order to have an advantage that the aristocratic clans and the Obvious Sect don't have. Thus, even among the aristocratic clans and the Obvious Sect, there are only a few people who know of its existence. This way, if the Hidden Sect wants to do something, if they don't say it themselves, it will be hard for others to know. The Hidden Sect has a lot of money, manpower, and authority. They also have an advantage of secrecy that no other faction can compare to. No one is able to figure out their depth or what they are doing. Then, would the Hidden Sect's patriarch be willing to be a subordinate of the Obvious Sect's patriarch?" Yang Fan listened and couldn't help but interrupt. "Does young Master Zhang think that Shinmu is doing something behind his back without his permission, or developing his own faction?" Teneno glanced at him and said softly, "Young Master was only suspicious at first, which was why he asked me to take a look. Now, I am almost certain." "What do you mean?" "Young Master possesses wealth that can rival a country. In the imperial court and in the wilderness, there are many officials, famous scholars, and aristocratic clans that work for him. But if you ask young master to suddenly gather an armed force that can move unhindered in Longyu, to ask him to transfer thousands of troops from a Turkic tribe, and to ask him to arrange thousands of troops to enter and leave Tufan, Heshi, and the Turkic Khaganate, he won't be able to do it. But Shenmu did it. He must be developing his own faction in Longyu, managing his connections and establishing his territory. Yang Fan's brows slightly knitted together. Tin Ano looked at him and said, "So, I didn't approve of you being together with Shenmu back then." "That's right. Shenmu can give you many things. But even though he has secretly developed his own faction, he still doesn't have the power to go against young master. After all, young master's authority is given by the family, and Shenmu is still unable to leave the family. Otherwise, he won't have enough financial and material resources to support his business." Tin Ano hesitated for a moment and said, "Actually, young master admires you very much. If I tell him, he can also give you what Shenmu can give you, or even more." At this point, Tin Ano's eyes suddenly flashed with an extremely obscure shyness. She suddenly thought of herself. If young master is willing to put Yang Fan in an important position, then as long as he asks, young master will give her to him, right? After all, she is just a little maid, and it is common for rich and powerful families to give beautiful maids to their friends and important subordinates. "Ah, no, you can't say." Yang Fan shook his head. Tin Ano raised her brows slightly and waited for his explanation. Yang Fan went silent for a moment before he said, "Actually, Shenmu's actions weren't a violation of the clan that he represented. The more power he has, the better he can protect the family." Tin Ano said, "This is not something we can consider. Just like the Turks, whether it is great Yabamosh or Gululu's sons, they all want the Turks to be better and stronger. But will they give up fighting for power because of this?" Yang Fan became somewhat anxious. Young Master Zhang's thoughts and concerns are all for his own family. Tin Ano looked at him in amusement and said, "Could it be that Shenmu is doing this for the country and the people?" Yang Fan shook his head and said, "I don't know, but I do know that his vision is much further than young Master Zhang's. Regardless of whether his original intention is for himself or for his family, his actions are beneficial to himself, the family behind him, the country, and the common people. Anu, you have seen along the way that the western region is much more difficult than the central plains. The common people here live very hard. If Shenmu's actions are successful, this place can be stabilized. I don't dare to think about lasting for thousands of generations, nor do I have the ability to do so. But even if we can stabilize this place for 100 years or so, then we can let 2 or 3 generations of people live well here, free from the pain of war." Tin Ano stared at him without saying a word. Seeing her expression, Yang Fan became even more anxious. "Yes, what Shenmu can give me, young Master Jiang can too. But if I want to take it, I must be able to live up to my conscience." Tin Ano faintly said, "You don't want me to tell young master?" Nodding his head anxiously, Yang Fan said, "Yes, you cannot tell him. If young Master Jiang knows about it, there will be a fight between him and Shenmu, which will affect Longyu." Tin Ano could not be bothered to listen to what he said next. She is only a little girl, and her heart is very small. How can she contain the whole world? How can she contain the millions of common people? That small heart can only contain one man. Since her man asked her not to say it, then she will not say it. Tin Ano said in a low voice, "If you do not allow me to say it, then I will not say it. This will affect the situation in Longyu. By then, there will be war everywhere." What did you say?" Delighted, Yang Fan said, "Really?" Tin Ano gently lowered her eyelids and said faintly, "I have promised you, and I will definitely do it." Hearing this, Yang Fan felt ashamed. It seems that when they were in the desert, he also promised her something. Quickly dispelling the guilt in his heart, Yang Fan said, "Ah, Nu, if the hundreds of thousands of people in Longyu are safe, It is all because of your merit. Tin Ano did not speak and only glanced at Yang Fan with a pair of big eyes that can speak. Yang Fan could not take it any more and said softly, I thank you too. The corner of Tin Ano's lips slightly curled up. Back then, when she was pushed to the bottom of the well by her biological father, who threw a lot of rubble and bricks in an attempt to bury her alive, she was still a 7-year-old girl. Her head was bleeding, her face was covered in tears, and her fingers were bleeding from the friction. But she still climbed out of the well. On the way to escape, many people fell to the side of the road and never got up again. She still gritted her teeth, gnawed on tree bark, swallowed guanine clay, and moved out of the disaster area step by step. She is not a girl who gives up easily. If he owes too many favors, it will become a debt, and a debt must be paid. At this moment, the curtain of the tent was lifted and a few men in leather robes walked in, accompanied by a snowstorm. You are a Tang scout? You said that the Turks are going to attack White Pavilion through this? In the middle of the group, a middle-aged man with snow-white eyebrows and a red face stared at Yang Fan with a pair of sharp eyes and asked in a very standard Han language. Today is a rare day of good weather. The sky that has been cloudy for many days has cleared up. In the snowy plains in the distance, a group of faint black dots suddenly appeared. The black dots gradually became clearer. It turned out to be a group of neatly dressed border soldiers of the Tang dynasty. They wore light leather armor with red habs on the outside, and their helmets were bright red tassels. In the snow-covered plains, they were as eye-catching as a ball of fire. Flying Fox Garrison Commander Su Yixing has brought a group of bodyguards out to hunt. The weather has been bad for several days. Sometimes it was windy, sometimes it was snowing, and sometimes there were strong gales mixed with snowstorms. Su Langjiang has been cooped up in the camp for many days and did not even leave his room. Now that there is finally a sunny day, he took the opportunity to bring a group of bodyguards out to relax. Riding a horse on the snowy plains was indescribably carefree. Su Langjiang's mood was also very good. Haha, it's been a few days of wind and snow. It's really suffocating. Riding a horse like this is really incomparably enjoyable. One of the bodyguards laughed and said, The wind and snow for several days, we can't stand it, and those wild beasts can't stand it either. Now that the weather has cleared up, it is time for those wild beasts to come out to look for food. With Longjiang's divine arrows, we will definitely be able to return with a full load today. Su Langjiang laughed loudly and pointed his longbow at the bodyguard. You little brat, you really know how to talk, haha. Today we will hunt a few deer back to give our brothers a sumptuous feast. He had just arrived when a soldier who was looking around suddenly called out, Langjiang, there is movement over there. Su Langjiang thought that the soldier had discovered some wild beast. With a flip of his hand, he took out an arrow from his quiver and knocked it on the bowstring. Following the sound, he said, What did you see? The soldier pressed his hands on the saddle and actually leaped onto the horse's back. With one hand on his head, he squinted his eyes and looked into the distance. He shouted, There are people. So many people. Chapter 261. Hearing this, Commander Su's face changed and several of his bodyguards hurriedly surrounded him. One of them anxiously said, The situation ahead is unclear. Commander Su is the commander of the army, and nothing can happen to him. Let's quickly return to camp. Su Langjiang cursed. Your mother's dog fart. You don't even know who's coming. Yet you want me to be a general who flees in fear at the mere sight of wind? Humph. Commander Su raised his bow and thought for a moment before ordering his 2 bodyguards. Go! Watch carefully and be careful at home. Roger. The 2 bodyguards replied and rode towards the black mass of people in the distance. Su Langjiang looked at the dark mass in the distance and was secretly alarmed. However, judging from the speed of the black dots' movement, they weren't moving very fast. Su Langjiang patiently waited for his bodyguards to scout out the situation. When the 2 bodyguards got close to the enemy camp, they realized that something was amiss. There were men and women, old and young, riding horses and carriages. No matter what, they did not look like the Turkic army that was about to attack them. Emboldening their courage, they approached them and asked. To their surprise, they were nomadic herdsmen. Their chief had visited Flying Fox Pass many times to pay his respects to General Su, so they recognized him. The two personal guards hurriedly told the other party to stop where they were and let a few people back. From afar, they saw the two imperial bodyguards, leading a few people back. Without waiting for orders, the personal guard beside Su Lang, general, leaped onto the back of a horse. Looking at the hand signals of the two people in the distance, he then sat back on the horse and said to Su Lang, general, it's not an enemy attack. Commander Su secretly heaved a sigh of relief and said, Let's go take a look. He urged his horse forward. Who are they? Seeing the two bodyguards rush up to him, Commander Su reined in his horse and asked. One of the bodyguards panted and said, Commander Su, they are the nomadic Chong tribe in the northwest. Commander Su was startled and said, In this winter and snow, where are they going? The bodyguard panted and said, They are not migrating. They are escaping back to Ming Wei garrison. They said that the Turkic army is about to attack at least 100,000 strong. Commander Su's face changed, and he cried out, Who said that the Turkic army is about to attack? How did you know? His question was no longer directed at his bodyguard, but at the three knights dressed like shepherds who had returned with his bodyguard. General Su, this is the information that I found out. One of the three men stepped forward on his horse and answered in a clear voice. This person was a slightly hairy youth. His appearance was handsome, and when he looked around he had a bit of an imposing aura. When General Su saw him, his tone of voice, which was originally going to scold him, softened a bit. Who are you? Yang Fan reached into his robes, and a few flying fox-mouthed soldiers immediately raised their bows, knocked their arrows, and aimed at him. Yang Fan slowed down and took out a fish talisman from his chest pocket. He held it up in the air to show that it was not a weapon. Then he threw it and shouted, General Lang, please have a look. Su Yixing caught the token in his hand and examined it carefully. He hesitantly said, This seems to be the waist token of the Imperial Army. Su Yixing was a garrison general of the Border Army, so he wasn't very familiar with this special token of the Imperial Army. From the style, the patterns, and the materials used, he could tell that it was a special token used by the Imperial Army's generals to wear in the temporary Imperial residence. However, not every border commander knew the existence of the 100 cavalry like the back of their hand. Yang Fan said, Yes, I am Yang Fan of the 100 cavalry of the Yulin Guards. I was ordered by the Emperor to go to the western regions on official business, and I happened to find out the secrets of the Turkic army. I have already sent someone to Flying Foxmouth to warn you. Did General Lang receive the warning? Su Longjung's expression turned grave as he asked, You sent someone here? Who? Yang Fan said, I had sent the scouts from Shanzhou, Gao Shiji, Big Bear, and the others to warn you first. Has General Lang met them? The corner of Commander Su's I twitched a few times, saying there were a few of them, but I did not believe their words. I have already escorted them to Liangzhou to confirm their identities. Yang Fan anxiously said, General Su, do you know how much risk we took to obtain accurate information on the Turkic army? You did not believe their words. The Turkic army can appear at any time. Do you know how many civilians will be harmed if the military plan is delayed? Even the 5,000 soldiers you have stationed at Flying Foxmouth may not be able to safely return to Mingwei. Commander Su said, The information is true? A few days ago, I just received a signal from GNC that a large group of Turkic army is attacking GNC. Could it be that they are attacking my white pavilion? Yang Fan loudly said, Did Gao Shiji not report to General that the Turkic army's attack on GNC is a feint? Su Yixing's expression was uncertain for a long time. The scouts he sent to the mountains to investigate have not returned yet, so he really could not determine whether Yang Fan's words were true or false. But Yang Fan once again confirmed to him that the Turkic army is coming, and he is a member of the Imperial Army. Commander Su did not dare to ignore him. Commander Su thought for a while and suddenly turned his horse's head, shouting, "Return to camp immediately!" Yang Fan called out, "General, wait!" Su Yixing reined his horse back and coldly said, "What now?" Yang Fan said, "If we calmly return to Mingwei now, I am afraid it will be too late. General can send people to the various tribes to warn them, and at the same time send people back to Flying Fox Mouth to light the beacon to call for reinforcements." Su Yixing's countenance changed. "The enemy has not appeared yet, and you want me to listen to your side of the story? Then I will send all the nomadic tribes back to Mingwei, and then light the beacon to report to the border town. If the information is not accurate, who will bear the crime of misinforming the military and mobilizing the troops? Do you want me to use the beacon to play with the feudal vassals?" Yang Fan was also angry. He had risked his life to break into White Pavilion, and did not expect this Flying Foxmouth general to be so cowardly. Although it is inappropriate to believe in military intelligence, but the consequences of believing or not believing, can he not distinguish which is more important? Yang Fan angrily said, "Is it a big matter to believe in military intelligence and be alarmed for false alarm? Or is it a big crime to delay military intelligence and lose the lives of soldiers and civilians? Commander Su, you are so muddle-headed." Su Yixing was furious. He circled his horse, his hand on the hilt of his sword, and sternly said, "I have been guarding the border for more than 10 years. My service is great. Since when is it up to you, a young man, to lecture me?" Tin Ano, who was accompanying Yang Fan, saw him pressing down on his sword and could not help but reach out to hold the sword at his waist. As soon as she moved, the dozens of Flying Foxmouth soldiers immediately grabbed their swords, drew their bows, and both sides were in a state of mutual hostility. When the Yen Air herdsman who accompanied Yang Fan and Tin Ano saw the stance of both sides, he did not know why both sides were fighting since they were both from the imperial court. He was so frightened that he repeatedly waved his hands and tried to mediate. At this moment, a person suddenly ran out from the side of the mountain pass. This person was wearing a sheepskin jacket, which was so big that it hung down to his buttocks. Because it was worn inside out, the wool was exposed. If he lay in the snow without moving, it would be very difficult to see his existence. Both his legs were wrapped in leather greaves, which extended all the way up to his thighs. Using a wide leather belt, they were securely wrapped around his legs. This way, when he moved in the snow, he would not have to worry about the snow seeping into his boots. This person was practically crawling out of the mountain pass. Suddenly, he saw someone in front of him and was overjoyed. Looking at their attire, he recognized them as his brothers and couldn't help but shout, "Quick, save me! There are Turkic pursuers behind us." When the two sides heard this shout, they couldn't help but turn their heads to look. "It's Guizhou, quickly save him." When Commander Su saw that it was one of his personal guards, he couldn't help but exclaim. Almost at the same time, a few of his personal guards had already rushed over. So. Dozens of sharp arrows shot out from the valley. The sharp arrows pierced through the air, making shrill whistling sounds. Gu Zhou cried out in pain as his shoulder was hit by a deep arrow and he fell head first into the snow. Enduring the pain, he climbed up and continued to run towards his men. As soon as the bodyguards saw the Turks appear at the mouth of the valley, they immediately raised their bows and shot at them. The few Turks who rushed out of the valley did not expect that there would be so many people at the entrance of the valley. In a moment of hesitation, the Tang arrows arrived. 2 of the Turks could not dodge in time and were shot down from their horses. The rest of the Turks immediately dispersed and retaliated with arrows. Both sides began to shoot at each other with the entrance of the valley as their base. "What's going on? Where did these Turks come from?" Su Langjiang urged his horse forward and bent down to interrogate Gu Zhou. Gu Zhou had an arrow stuck in his shoulder. Enduring the intense pain, Gu Zhou reported to Su Langjiang. Langjiang, a large group of Turks has arrived. We just happened to run into the vanguard of the Turks. Our brothers are probably all dead. Commander Su was shocked. How many Turks are there? Gu Zhou said, when we were hiding in the valley, we saw a dense mass of people. Before we could estimate their numbers, we were discovered by the scouts they sent ahead of us. They chased us all the way, and only this subordinate managed to escape. Here, Gu Zhou gritted his teeth and pulled out the arrow from his shoulder and threw it on the ground. He shouted, "These are the scouts of the Turks. The main force is still behind. General, quickly return to Flying Fox Pass." Commander Su lifted his head to look at the entrance of the valley and saw that there were more than 10 of them. He could not help but feel his face burning. There were 2 warnings, but he did not believe them. Now that the Turks were right in front of him, it was as if he was slapped in the face. He was angry and regretful at the same time. Su Langjiang hung his bow properly, schwa. He drew his saber and loudly said, "Gu Zhou Liangxi, the 2 of you quickly return to Flying Fox's Mouth and send a message to Old Shao. Tell him to light the fire beacon and have the entire army withdraw to defend Ming Wei's garrison." Gu Zhou was shocked. "Commander Su, what are you doing?" Commander Su sneered, "They are just a few dozen Turks. I will slaughter them all." He urged his horse and rushed towards the entrance of the valley. At this time, the inner tribe's shepherd saw that the Turks had indeed appeared and had already fled back to his tribe. The tribe's shepherds, who had been waiting in the same spot, listened to his narration and then looked at the fierce battle at the valley entrance. Immediately, chaos ensued and the entire tribe sped up and fled south. Su Yixing has been in the army for more than 10 years and has been stationed at Flying Fox Pass for 4 years. Although he has always been an autocrat, his subordinates are very lenient and he is loved and respected by the army. Seeing that he has personally charged forward, his personal guards howled and followed. Gu Zhou stomped his feet and was about to demand a horse from the fleeing Chong tribesmen when he suddenly saw an arrow shoot through the throat of one of his guards, and he fell off his horse. He hurriedly grabbed the horse and mounted it. Together with the other guard, he ran towards Flying Fox Pass. What should we do? Tin Ano gripped the hilt of her sword and her beautiful eyes stared at Yang Fan. Chapter 262. Seeing how obstinate and self-opinionated Commander Su was, first not daring to take charge and not believing the information they had reported, thus delaying the opportunity to fight. Now, as the commander-in-chief of the 3 armies, he was personally going into battle and putting himself in danger. Yang Fan couldn't help but be furious. Tin Ano advised, "Most of the border generals are like this. They don't know how to read and rarely study, relying solely on their bravery to get promoted. Besides, he didn't believe you earlier and felt a little embarrassed. How can he leave without fighting for a while?" Yang Fan was so angry that he didn't choose his words. "Damn it, let's go. Let's go as well and bring him back in one piece. If he really dies here, it'll be even more unsalvageable. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder." Yang Fan was so angry that he cursed, but Tin Ano found it all the more interesting. She pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Instead, she followed Yang Fan and charged toward the mountain pass. The battle at the entrance of the valley had already turned into a melee. The 2 sides added up to nearly 100 warhorses, causing snow to fly and blood to fly. It was an incomparably bitter scene. Just as Yang Fan reached the entrance of the valley, 2 sabers, one from the left and one from the right, whizzed toward his body. "Ha!" Tin Ano charged forward on her horse. With a delicate shout, her sword flickered like a snake's tongue, striking the surface of one of the sabers. With a ding, the saber was knocked away, and with a flip of her wrist, she chopped at the other person's wrist. At the same time, the steel saber in Yang Fan's hand knocked away the other saber. With a dang, the saber was jolted high into the air. Turning the saber back, he shouted at Tin Ano, "Bow!" Tineno understood and lowered her head, the sword in her hand, not stopping. The saber-wielding Turkic warrior couldn't pull back in time, and 4 of his fingers were cut off. With a loud cry, the saber in his hand fell off his horse, along with 4 broken fingers. At the same time, Yongfan's saber whistled past the top of Tineno's head with a raging gale. The saber hacked at a spear that was stabbing at him from the side, cutting it open. The people at the entrance of the valley were already engaged in a fierce battle. Yongfan had forced the surrounding enemies away and urged his horse to rush to Su Longjiang's side. Tineno urged her horse to follow. Yongfan wielded his saber fiercely, specializing in opening and closing, forcefully blocking the enemy's weapons. Tineno's sword was light and nimble, making use of the opportunities Yongfan had created for her. She stabbed and slashed, injuring several Turkic scouts who were charging at her. Their coordination was perfect. Kill! Yongfan used his saber to parry away a saber that had slashed at his head. Following the momentum of the saber in his hand rose up and then lowered down, like a hurricane, chopping down at the enemy's head. A Turkic soldier on the right hurriedly came to Yongfan's rescue, thrusting his spear at Yongfan's chest. Tineno's left hand shook and a string of silver light flew out. With a whoosh, the silver light wrapped around the spear shaft of the Turkic soldier. Reaching out to grab the spear, Tineno's body leapt off the horse's back, and with a flick of the sword in his right hand, like an agile snake, it slid down the Turkic soldier's throat. Almost at the same time, Yongfan's saber cleaved the enemy commander in 2 like a watermelon. The Turkic soldier to the side also abandoned his spear and clutched at his throat with both hands. Blood spurted out from between his fingers as he fell backward. Su Longjiang, don't make the same mistake again. You are the commanding general of the army. How can you ensure? Dang, dang, dang. As Yongfan spoke, the saber in his hand slashed like lightning, knocking away several weapons that were aimed at him and Su Longjiang. He then continued, "Safely withdraw the 5,000 soldiers from Flying Fox Pass to Mingwei Garrison is your responsibility." Su Longjiang's eyes were bloodshot. He waved the blood-stained saber in his hand and shouted, "Kill! Kill them all before leaving." With that, he raised the reins and fearlessly charged at the enemy again. Yongfan clenched his teeth in hatred. Helpless, he could only follow this boorish man and continue charging forward. Woo! The wind and snow at the entrance of the valley surged, and the arrows pierced through the air, creating a whistling sound. At this moment, the whistling sound of the arrows was several times louder. The sound was strange and sharp. Hearing this, Su Longjiang suddenly pulled on the reins of his horse and said in surprise, "The whistling sound!" The whistling sound began at the end of the Qin dynasty and the beginning of the Han dynasty. At that time, Mao Dun was the Xiongnu crown prince, but his father had a son with the woman he loved, so he wanted to depose him and send him to the Yuezhi kingdom as a hostage. As soon as Mao Dun arrived at the Yuezhi kingdom, his father launched an attack on the Yuezhi kingdom and tried to use the Yuezhi kingdom to kill his son. Fortunately, Mao Dun was alert and managed to escape by stealing a fast horse. After that, Mao Dun developed the whistling sound. This kind of arrow was made up of a spear blade and a spear collar. There was a ridge in the middle to prevent the arc from being dented. The cross-section of the spear collar was circular, and when it was shot, it would make a shrill sound. After that, Mao Dun trained his soldiers. Wherever the whistling sound pointed, his men had to shoot, and those who disobeyed would be killed. Mao Dun first shot his beloved horse, then shot his beloved wife, and trained his guards to shoot whenever they heard the whistling sound. They had no time to consider who the other party was. The last person he shot the whistling sound at was his father, and in the end he became the Xiongnu Chanyu. After that, the whistling sound became a special kind of arrow in the army. It could be used as a warning and also to intimidate the enemy. It could also be used to point out targets and give military orders in an army of thousands. General Su was out hunting with his bodyguards, and they were already dozens of miles away from the flying foxmouth. It could not be his men who shot the whistling sound. So where did this whistling sound come from? In just a moment, he realized that something was wrong. From the mouth of the valley, dozens of Turkic cavalry rushed out, all of them with bows and arrows. The arrows fell like rain as they galloped and shot, even though there were only dozens of them. But because of the continuous firing of arrows, it was as if hundreds of people were shooting at the same time. The rain of arrows instantly covered the Tang army's position in the valley, especially the whistling sound just now. It was estimated that the bow used was at least 2 stones worth of strength. The arrow was strong and fast, and one flew right into the chest of a Tang soldier. The whistling sound stopped abruptly. The sharp arrow pierced through the Tang soldier's leather armor and robe, all the way to the feather, and the arrowhead was exposed from the back. Dang, dang, dang! Yang Fan knocked away 3 arrows in succession, and hid in the stirrup to avoid an arrow aimed at his chest. He glanced sideways at Tin Ano, and seeing that she was unharmed, he shouted sternly at General Su. "General Su, why are you still not leaving? If the 5,000 soldiers of the Flying Foxmouth lose their lives here, if the garrison of Mingwei is lost because the garrison is scattered, if Liangzhou is captured because of this, 100 deaths will not be enough to atone for your sins." Su Langjiang was startled by his roar. He saw the Turkic soldiers at the mouth of the valley were like a swarm of ants, and knew that their main force would soon arrive. Luckily, the valley was narrow. The thousands of soldiers and horses could not spread out. Otherwise, they would have rushed out like the tide by now. Su Langjiang could only angrily turn his horse's head and roar, "Let's retreat!" By this time, the fresh troops surging out of the valley had already seen them, and even more so noticed General Su, because his armor was too dazzling. At this time, whether it was the nomads or the armies of the Central Plains, there were very few heavy cavalry, because the main horse breed at that time was the Mongolian horse from the north, and the Mongolian horse was too short. If it was to carry a heavy cavalry, its mobility would severely restrict its power. The heavy cavalry of the Sui dynasty were utterly defeated by the light cavalry and spear-wielders of the peasant army. Therefore, even though the armors of the Tang dynasty were extremely high, there were very few generals who wore such a flashy set of armor. Not only was the armor majestic, but it was also polished to the point where it shone brightly like a mirror. Under the bright sunshine today, it was practically a live target. When the Turks rushed out of the mountain pass, they were also surprised to see the Tang army here. Then they saw that there were not many Tang soldiers, and one of them was obviously a general. Although they did not understand why they would appear here with so few people, they knew that this was a rare opportunity. The Turk general who shot the arrow with his 2 stone, Bao immediately knocked the bowstring and aimed at General Su. Woo! This time he didn't use a whistling arrow, but the arrow was swift and fast. It still let out a shrill sound as it pierced through the air. Yang Fan only felt his eardrums explode. A wolf-fang arrow had already pierced through the back of General Su, who had just turned his horse around. Almost without thinking, Yang Fan immediately chopped down with his saber. The arrow was too fast. The naked eye could only see a blur, and he slashed down based on his intuition. The saber was like lightning meeting the shadow of the arrow. The arrow was knocked away. The speed and power of the arrow was truly frightening, the shock numbing Yang Fan's wrist. But he did not have the time to care, because this person fired another 3 arrows in succession, unexpectedly shooting at him, General Su, and Tin Ano at the same time. The 3 arrows arrived at the same time, too much for the eye to take in. Yang Fan's legs tightened around the horse's belly, his body slanting to the side, avoiding the arrow aimed at him and slashing at the front of Tin Ano with his saber. Tin Ano had just turned her horse around and could not dodge in time. Without thinking, the sword in her hand swung out. Come! The sword was broken, and the arrow slightly changed direction, shooting towards her face. Tin Ano was so shocked that she closed her eyes. Almost at the same time, a snow-white saber light chopped down in front of her, forcibly chopping down the arrow. By this time, Yang Fan wanted to save General Su, but it was already too late. Su Langjiang had just turned his horse around. He did not even see the action of Yang Fan chopping down the first arrow for him. Although General Su was a reckless and crude man, he was very caring towards his subordinates. He was not willing to escape alone. He turned his horse around and subconsciously straightened his back. He was just about to call his personal guards to retreat together when an arrow came from behind. Pooh! It pierced through the gap of the breastplate and into the middle of his back. Ah! Su Langjiang screamed. He was thrown forward by the arrow. Yang Fan was greatly shocked. He circled his horse around and grabbed Su Langjiang's reins. "I'll take you away," he shouted. Finished speaking, he fiercely slapped the horse's buttocks with the blade of his saber, urging the horse to leave. Teneno was only in charge of guarding his left and right. As soon as she saw him leaving, she did not hesitate, and the three of them and 3 horses ran away. Although General Su was not a smart and resourceful general, he dared to fight in the face of battle and sympathized with his soldiers. He was loved and respected by the garrison at Flying Fox Pass and had a very high prestige in the army. These personal guards were his most trusted aides. As soon as they saw their general being hit by an arrow, their eyes turned red and not one of them was willing to retreat. They all rushed forward, fighting for a chance for General Su to escape. The fight at the valley entrance had reached its climax, but the Turkic reinforcements were still coming. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the last Tang soldier who was defending the valley entrance fell down, his body full of wounds and arrows. The white snow at the valley entrance had already turned to mud, and many places were suffused with a dark red color. The Turkic general with the 2-stone iron bow urged his horse and slowly walked out from the pile of corpses. His eyes slowly swept past the corpses on the ground and looked at the 3 indistinct black dots in the distance. He coldly laughed and ordered, "Quickly inform the great Yabgu, we can move faster." With one hand holding the reins, the other pointing the iron bow forward, he said in high spirits, "Today's lunch we will eat at Flying Fox Pass." Chapter 263. Su Langjiang. Su Langjiang. Yang Fan pulled Su Langjiang's horse and galloped several arrows away. Seeing that there was no danger for the time being, he turned his head to look at Su Langjiang. He saw that Su Langjiang was leaning on the horse and was on the verge of collapsing. His face was deathly pale, and there was a faint trace of blood seeping out of his mouth. The arrow pierced through his heart, and he is already heavily injured. How can he withstand such a jolt? Yang Fan may be in a hurry, but he knows that with some jolts, he may still have a chance to escape. If he stops now, he will be sending Su Langjiang to his death. The invading Turks are all cavalry, and they will not delay him for long. But the thick arrow pierced through Su Langjiang's body, and as he galloped, his injuries are getting worse and worse. His internal organs are in a mess, and it looks like he is about to collapse. Yang Fan saw this and became anxious. The pursuers will be here soon, and if something happens to this Flying Fox commander-in-chief, what should he do? At that time, it is true that the commander-in-chief is the soul of the army. If a commander-in-chief dies suddenly, the morale of the army will crumble and chaos will ensue. But although Yang Fan was anxious, there is nothing he can do. At this moment, Teneno suddenly pointed ahead and said excitedly, "Erling, look, there is a carriage!" Yang Fan looked up and saw a chariot moving strenuously on the snowy ground. Beside it was a horse with a shepherd on its back, guarding the chariot like an ant on a hot pan. Yang Fan urged the horse forward, and Teneno asked in the dialect of Longyu, "Why are you all so slow?" There is a driver on the carriage, and there are 3 horses hitched to the shaft of the carriage. Beside the carriage is a middle-aged man. When Yang Fan and Teneno persuaded their tribe to move to Mingwei, they met these 2 men. The middle-aged man replied, "The carriage is slow, and I am in a hurry." The Tian Ai Nu peeked into the carriage and saw that there was an old man, 2 women, and 2 children. The Tian Ai Nu asked, "Why aren't you riding horses?" The middle-aged shepherd said, "My family doesn't have any strong laborers. We can't let the horses go. You only sell wine in the tribe, not horses. Why do you keep so many horses at home?" Tin Eno looked at Commander Sioux, who was about to collapse, and said, "I'll give you my horse and exchange it for your carriage." The middle-aged shepherd hesitated. Tin Eno said, "What are you hesitating for?" The middle-aged shepherd said embarrassedly, "There are still many jars of wine in the carriage. Hearing this, Tin Eno looked at the cart again. The back half of the cart was piled high, and the middle and top of the cart were stuffed with felt blankets and cloth, probably to prevent the wine jugs from breaking during the bumps. No wonder the speed of his car was so slow. How could it run fast when carrying so much alcohol? Tin Eno was amused and annoyed at the same time. He shouted, "The Turks are about to catch up. We are about to lose our lives, and you still want to drink." The middle-aged shepherd wanted to cry, but had no tears. "Miss, my family relies on selling wine for a living. If the wine is gone, we won't be able to live even if we escape." The Tian Ai Nu reached into her bosom and found a few golden beans. The Tian Ai Nu said, "I have some golden beans here, plus these 3 top-notch horses. It's more than enough to trade for your wine. Do you want to trade?" She took out a handful of golden beans and placed them in front of him. There were about 6 or 7 of them, and they shined brightly under the sun. The shepherd looked at the golden beans in her hand and then looked at the 3 good horses. He estimated that they were indeed worth his carriage of wine. He quickly nodded and said, "Deal, deal, deal. I'll exchange, I'll exchange." Immediately, Yong Fan and Tin Eno dismounted from their horses and helped the dying Su Langjiang down. The entire shepherd family left the carriage and mounted their horses. Although the family consisted of old people, children, and women, they grew up in the grasslands. How could they not know how to ride a horse? They mounted their horses and thanked Tin Eno before urging their horses to leave. Tin Eno shot forward and jumped onto the carriage. He lifted all the felt and fur blankets and quickly pushed the jars of wine out of the carriage. When all the jars of wine in the carriage were thrown into the snow, Tin Eno spread out the felt and fur blankets. He and Yong Fan carried Su Langjiang onto the carriage. By this time, Su Langjiang was already unconscious. Tin Eno looked at the arrows deeply embedded in Su Langjiang's body and worriedly said, "Erlang, I'm afraid he won't make it." Yong Fan said, "Hold him up a bit and let him experience less bumps. As long as he's still breathing, it's fine." After saying this, Yong Fan let down the curtain and grabbed the horse's reins with both hands. He shouted, "Go!" and the carriage sped across the snowy plains. At this time, Flying Fox Pass was in a mess. The 3 armies hurriedly assembled. All the supplies that could be moved were loaded onto the carriages. Those that couldn't be moved were scattered and prepared to be burned. This Deputy General Xiao Ningfeng was more than capable of commanding. However, General Su had always been a patriarch in Flying Fox's eyes. While it was true that he sympathized with his soldiers, he treated this place like his own stronghold, and no one could disobey him. Even this deputy general always followed his orders, so his prestige in the army was far lower than General Su's. When he gathered his troops and prepared to leave, the brigade marshals and platoon leaders under him started to argue and quarrel. Some suggested that the supplies should leave first and the main group should hurry over to support Su Langjiang. Some suggested that the entire army should retreat to Mingwei Garrison. Some suggested that the troops should go to the snowy plains to fight the Turks' ambush. At this time, Deputy General Xiao could no longer control the situation. A bunch of generals and platoon commanders argued, causing Deputy General Xiao to have a headache. At this time, the Flaming Ear tribesmen ran down in a panic. Deputy General Xiao hurriedly grabbed a few shepherds and asked them about the situation. These shepherds took advantage of the battle at the entrance of the valley to escape. How would they know the exact situation there? When Deputy Commander Xiao asked, they all began to speak at once. Some said that Su Langjiang and his men had displayed their invincible might, that the Turks had been utterly routed and that they had secured the entrance to the valley. Some said that the Turks had covered the sky and the earth, numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Su Langjiang was finished, and the Turks were about to arrive. They threw out a few sentences and ran for their lives. Hearing this, Xiao Ningfeng and the other generals and platoon commanders became more and more confused. There were few brigade commanders and captains whose eyes were bloodshot. They roared that Deputy General Xiao was a useless coward and that he did not dare to go. They wanted to bring their troops to the rescue. Some generals urged Deputy General Xiao to quickly give the order for the whole army to retreat to Mingwei garrison. As the two sides quarreled, the entire Flying Fox Pass camp became like a pot of porridge in a market. At this time, Yang Fan hurriedly rushed over with his carriage. The garrison of Flying Fox Pass had already arrived at the foot of the hill. All kinds of carriages loaded with supplies were parked there in a disorderly manner. The generals and colonels with different opinions surrounded Xiao Ningfeng and argued endlessly. The soldiers, on the other hand, stood in the snow with their spears in their arms, not knowing what to do. From afar, Yang Fan could hear the curses and roars of the generals. He hurriedly slowed down the carriage. Lifting the curtain, he turned around and asked, "The three armies are in chaos. Can you wake him up and tell him to go next?" Yang Fan's voice trailed off. Tin Ano lightly shook his head at him and withdrew his hand from Su Longjiang's neck. He said in a low voice, "He's dead." Yang Fan's heart sank. He had gone through so much trouble to rescue Su Langjiang, but in the end he was still dead. Yang Fan's anxiety and unease were not entirely because Su Langjiang did not value the intelligence they had painstakingly sent over. It was also because he was the one who had confirmed that Baiting was the target. If the Turks had chosen Polygonum Spring in Hushi as the target, it would have also caused great harm to the people of Hushi, although that would have put the imperial court in an even more difficult situation, and the Tubo might have interfered and taken the opportunity to direct the conflict between the princes and ministers to the Tang dynasty. He had chosen this place. He had chosen this place because it was convenient for reinforcements from the rear. In times of emergency, he could also transfer troops from the nearby border armies of Hushi and Shuafang. However, Su Longjiang's arrogance and conceit had hindered the military plan. If a single mistake had caused great harm to the people of Liangzhou, he would not be able to absolve himself from the blame. Yang Fan raised his head and looked at the top of the mountain. There were 3 beacon towers built on the top of the mountain. The weather today was very good, and the 3 beacon towers were burning with smoke. The smoke billowed into the sky, and although it was blown by the wind, it did not dissipate for a long time. With these beacons, at least the garrison in the direction of Mingwei could be prepared in advance. The nomadic tribes large and small outside of Mingwei were all familiar with this warning signal. As long as they weren't too stupid, they would immediately evacuate toward Mingwei. Of course, if they ran into someone who would rather sacrifice his life than his wealth, then there was really nothing they could do. The officers were still quarreling beside his ears when Yang Fan suddenly felt an inexplicable anger. He abruptly turned around and stood at the front of the carriage, shouting, "All of you, stop quarreling!" The officers who were in the middle of quarreling were all startled. Judging from his attire, he seemed to be a nomad from the grasslands, but his Han accent was perfect. Yang Fan shouted, "The Turks have 2 armies, one from the Gobi Desert and the other from Mimachuan, are attacking Baiting. Right now, the right army from Mimachuan has already reached the mountain pass, and you all are still quarreling here. Why aren't you withdrawing to Mingwei immediately? When the enemy arrives, won't all of your infantry be buried here?" Fei, who was a garrison stationed here, and most of them were infantry. In reality, because the main responsibility of the garrison at the border was to defend, most of the soldiers in the army were infantry. When there was a need to leave the fortress to fight in the wild, they would deploy another army consisting mainly of cavalry. These soldiers who guarded the border all year round rarely had the chance to use horses. So they wouldn't keep a large number of horses in the barracks and waste the military's resources. Xiao Ningfeng was currently full of anger from the quarreling of his disobedient subordinates. Seeing an outsider shouting at him, he couldn't help but angrily say, "Who are you?" Yang Fan flashed his waist token and said loudly, "Imperial Guard Yang Fan of the Imperial Guard of the Yulin Forest. I was ordered by the Emperor to go west on official business. I heard news of the Turks and specially came to warn you." Beside the ancient ship, Liang Si let out in awe and said, "It's him! He's the one talking to Lang General!" A crowd of high-ranking military officers surrounded him and asked at the same time, "How is Lang Jiang? Is Su Lang Jiang doing well?" "Lang General Su," Yang Fan hesitated for a moment. Just as he was about to make up his mind and tell them about Su Ichi's death, Lang General Su's angry voice suddenly came from the carriage. "I was originally doing very well, but now I'm about to die from anger because of you bastards." Chapter 264. General Lang. Brother Su. When the generals heard the voice, they were surprised and happy. They quickly left Yang Fan and surrounded the carriage. Someone was about to get on the carriage to lift the curtain when another angry roar came from the carriage. "Don't Can get on. I've been shot in the butt and can't move at all. Do you think I look good lying here? Ouch. It hurts so much. I still want to see people in the future. Get lost." When the generals heard that Su Langjiang had been shot in buttocks, they immediately roared with laughter. It was fine as long as he was still alive. The buttocks weren't vital points, and in the military, which man didn't get injured on the body? As long as his buttocks were injured, they wouldn't care. Xiao Ningfeng held back his laughter and said, "I'll get the doctor to treat General Su." Su Yixing snorted and said, "There's a barb on the arrow. We have to cut open the flesh to pull the arrow out. We don't have the time to do that now." Yang Fan turned around and stared at the curtain. He was so shocked that he almost jumped up. This was definitely Su Yixing's voice. The tone, and the thickness of the voice were all real. But wasn't Su Yixing dead? With Tin Ano's skills, how could he be wrong? Besides, even if he was alive, he couldn't be so full of energy. Could it be? Yang Fan suddenly thought of Tin Ano's godly ventriloquism. Su Yixing said angrily in the carriage, "I asked Guzhou and Liang Xir to come back and report the news. I told you to light the beacon and let the whole army return to defend the Ming dynasty. Why are you still talking nonsense here?" Deputy General Xiao said embarrassedly, "General Lang, I've already been ordered to light the fire beacon and warn the troops along the border. We were originally going to retreat to Mingwei, but we're really worried about General Lang's safety. Some of our brothers want to bring people to rescue General Lang. Everyone is discussing here." In the carriage, Su Yixing shouted angrily, "Discuss? The fire has already reached the roof, and you guys are still discussing. Retreat to Mingwei immediately. Quick." "Yes." Xiao Ningfeng's spirit was lifted. He reined in his horse and shouted, "General Lang is back. General Lang has ordered the entire army to return to defend the Mingwei garrison. Set off immediately." The buglers waved the signal flags, and bugles sounded everywhere. Generals and colonels hurried back to their headquarters. The 5,000 soldiers finally set off in the direction of the Mingwei garrison. Yang Fan drove the big carriage and was protected by the soldiers in the middle. As the fully loaded supply wagons moved in the direction of Mingwei garrison, Tin Ano lifted the curtain of the carriage slightly and looked at the situation outside. He frowned and ordered loudly, "Why are they so slow? Old Xiao, did you drag all our jars and jars along with you?" Xiao Ningfeng ordered his men to burn the camp on the hillside and everything that could not be moved away in time. This included the firewood they chopped in autumn and the hay they prepared for the war horses. They did not want to leave anything for the Turks. At this moment, he had just turned his horse around and heard Su Yixing shout. He rushed to the front of the carriage and said, "Yes, General Lang, We have brought everything we can. Tin Ano said from inside the carriage, burn everything. Push them to the side of the road and burn them. Don't leave anything for the Turks. With all these things, when can we rush back to Mingwei garrison? I only want our brothers to be safe. Do you understand? Xiao Ningfeng's heart warmed, and he replied loudly, I understand. He immediately ordered all the carriages to be pushed to the side of the road and set on fire. The horses that were used to pull the carriages were also unloaded and replaced with soldiers. This way, the speed of the procession was indeed much faster. The procession of the army is very fast, but this speed is only relative to the walking speed of an ordinary person. Among the 5,000 people, there are almost 4,000 infantry soldiers. They can only walk on 2 legs, and they cannot run for their lives. They must maintain a certain amount of stamina in case their pursuers get too close. In Yang Fan's eyes, this speed is as slow as a cow. The carriage was sandwiched in the middle of the procession. Deputy General Xiao rode forward and back, nervously watching the procession of the entire army. The various generals were also commanding the orderly evacuation of the soldiers. Tin Ano sat in the carriage and continued to pretend to be Su Yixing. From time to time, he would give a military order. According to her request, the entire procession gradually divided into 4 columns and 4 sections horizontally, forming 4 intersections on the long road. Yang Fan drove the carriage all the way. Seeing that everyone was hurriedly marching and no one was paying attention to him, he turned around and lifted a corner of the curtain to take a look inside. Su Yixing's corpse had already been pushed to one side by Tin Ano. The corpse was lying there with an arrow sticking out of his back. Tin Ano sat cross-legged beside Su Yixing's corpse with one hand supporting his cheek. He was frowning and thinking about something. He did not even notice that Yang Fan had lifted the curtain to take a look inside. Yang Fan coughed softly and said in a suppressed voice, "Anu." Tin Ano was startled awake from his deep thoughts and raised his eyes to look at him. Yang Fan swallowed and asked nervously, "What are you thinking about?" The experience of Tin Ano pretending to be Su Yixing was comparable to his experience of pretending to be Musi. However, in terms of danger, although Tin Ano's current actions were not as good as his, the responsibility was 100 times heavier than his. Su Yixing did not die, although it had the effect of stabilizing the morale of the army, ending the argument between the generals, and quickly pulling out the camp. Because of this, the responsibility of commanding the army fell on her. In Yang Fan's eyes, it did not seem difficult to command the retreat of the 3 armies. After all, the life and death of the 3 armies were in her hands. Tin Ano stuck out her tongue and said in a low voice, "I am thinking about military books. There are many military books in young master's library. I have read many of them before, but they were just idle books. I don't know how many of them I can remember now." Thinking about military books? Is that okay? Yang Fan was speechless. Swoosh! A bright red flag was raised on the snowy plain. Immediately, a knight carrying the flag urged his horse to gallop. There was only him, a horse, and a flag on the snowy plain. However, on the distant horizon behind him, there was a black line surging towards him like a surging tide. Not far in front of him, within the limits of his sight, was a knight on horseback, who, as soon as his banner was raised, hoisted his own, and galloped off at a gallop, just as he had done. In this endless snowy plain, visibility was very high. Everywhere was white. If there was even the slightest difference in color, it could be clearly seen from far away. The Tianai knew was thinking hard about the military books that she had read about marching and setting up formations, communication and scouting, engaging the enemy in battle, camping and resting, and all the other knowledge related to war. Whenever she thought of something useful, she would give out orders in Su Yixing's tone. Needless to say, of the military books she remembered, some of them were known to Su Yixing, while others were unknown to Su Yixing. While it wasn't as if there were no literate generals who had relied purely on the knowledge and experience they had accumulated on the battlefield, Su Yixing was clearly not one of them. Raising the flag as a signal was one of Tin Aino's methods of warning. The principle behind it was actually very simple. It was just like the fire beacon, but this one used flags as a signal. It was extremely fast and effective. When the first horseman noticed the Turks and flashed his banner, before he could even reach the position of the second horseman, the signal from the banner had already been sent to the army advancing south. By the time Tin Aino heard that the Turks had caught up, the Turks were still 30 li away. The Turkic cavalry had caught up. This was a force of 3,000 Turkic cavalry. After charging out of the valley, they had hurriedly gathered 3,000 cavalry. Not waiting for the rest of the cavalry to emerge from the call, they had impatiently pursued. They were well aware that even though the garrison of Flying Fox Pass had 5,000 soldiers, most of them were foot soldiers. As long as their formation loosened even the slightest bit, these 5,000 soldiers would become sheep to be slaughtered by their 3,000 cavalry. Moreover, their men were still gradually making their way out of the kernel. As long as they could catch up to the Tang army, reinforcements would soon arrive. Eating up this Tang army in a field battle was extremely useful. The entire garrison of White Pavilion only had 15,000 soldiers, but with the terrain and fortress, these 15,000 soldiers were enough to stop an attack from an army of 100,000. However, if they were to eat up these 5,000 Tang soldiers, it would be hard to say if the remaining Tang soldiers would be able to defend Mingwei Citadel impenetrably. This wasn't as simple as adding and subtracting. If an arrow tower or a corner of a city required 10 people to defend, then if one lacked even one person, there was a chance that the enemy would be able to take advantage of it. Thus, after gathering only 3,000 soldiers, they impatiently chased down. No matter what, they had to bite down on this Tang army first. Lang General, the Turks have caught up. Xiao Ningfing hurried to the side of the carriage and nervously reported. Tin Aino's heart skipped a beat. He tried to calm his breathing and asked in Su Yixing's gruff voice, "How much further?" Xiao Ningfing replied, "From the flag, it's about 30 miles away." Tin Aino thought for a moment and ordered, "Everyone continue to advance. Don't panic. Archers and crossbowmen, gather at the rear and flanks at the outermost perimeter. The vanguard team is next. The battle team is next. The horse army is on standby at the left and center. All cavalrymen, dismount and walk to maintain their horses. Old and weak soldiers, gather at the front and leave the main force to quickly retreat to Mingwei Citadel." Xiao Ningfing would respond to whatever Tin Aino said. When Tin Aino was done with his instructions, Xiao Ningfing hurriedly turned around to pass on the order. He thought to himself, Lang General's buttocks were shot today, and he actually became enlightened. In the past, when I saw him commanding his brothers in battle, he didn't seem to be so methodical. As the Tian Ai Nu sat in the carriage, he was thinking hard about the strategy that could be used in the military books based on the allocation, strength, and geographical situation of the army. At the same time, he had to be careful not to let his voice reveal the slightest bit of abnormality, in case Xiao Ningfeng noticed anything amiss. As soon as Xiao Ningfeng left, Tian Ai Nu's shoulders slumped. She quietly crawled to the side of the sedan and called out pitifully, "Erlang, I'm so scared." Although Tin Aino was the one commanding the army on behalf of Su Yixing, Yang Fan was even more nervous than her. He was afraid that she wouldn't be able to answer and expose her identity. Listening to her conversation with Xiao Ningfeng, Yang Fan's heart was in his throat. Hearing Tin Aino's words, Yang Fan quickly turned his head and comforted her. "Be good, don't be afraid. Do it boldly. I don't think that Su Langjiang will be any better at commanding than you." Tin Aino didn't hear anything except for the word good. This word good made Tin Aino's heart burst with joy. All the bones in her body turned soft. She sat back down dizzily and leaned against the wall of the carriage. She felt her heart beating extremely fast, and her throat was a little choked. She felt like she was about to cry. What 100,000 Turkic soldiers? What returning to Mingwei Citadel? She didn't think about it anymore. The only thing that lingered in her mind was a happy sentence. He said, "I was very good." Chapter 265. General Lang, the pursuers are near. 20 li away. General Lang, the pursuers are near. 15 li away. General Lang, the pursuers are near. 10 li away. Stop. Rear formation to front formation. Stay where you are. Under Tin Ano's order, the Tang army that was marching quickly stopped. The entire army turned around and rested on the spot. They had already sent cavalry back to Mingwei Garrison to ask for reinforcements. However, Mingwei Garrison only had 2,500 cavalry. They were not sure if the defending general would dare to take the risk of the enemy swallowing up a fresh force, which would further weaken Mingwei Garrison's defenses and send reinforcements. Whether the reinforcements came or not, they could only rely on themselves now that there were no reinforcements. On the main road, only the old and weak soldiers and the cooks who were originally responsible for feeding the horses and cooking continued to march quickly towards Mingwei Garrison. Everyone else had stopped. The original rear formation was densely packed with archers and crossbowmen. Behind them were the jumping soldiers, ambushers, and other close combat infantry. The entire army was arranged in an echelon formation. This was not because of Tin Ano's order, but because it was the Tang army's usual formation. Each echelon of the Tang army was like a phalanx, but within each phalanx, the spear and shield wielders formed a small wedge formation. In truth, even though Su Yixing had been shot in the buttocks and did not want his subordinates to see him in such an embarrassing state, it was rather strange that he still refused to show himself at such a critical moment. But now, all the Tang soldiers were nervously looking into the distance, waiting for the Turks to charge over, and no one was thinking about this illogical point. The Tian AI New tugged at the corner of the curtain and looked outside. The reason for their hasty retreat was because they heard that the other side had 100,000-strong army, far more than their 5,000 undefended troops could resist. The soldiers already knew this, so even before the Turks arrived, they had already gained the upper hand with a show of strength. The Tang officers and soldiers were somewhat uneasy. Tin Ano frowned and thought, "The military books say that when two armies fight, the most important thing is morale. How can they withstand the attack of the Turks?" She thought for a moment and shouted, "Guzhou, Liang Xir!" At this time, Deputy General Xiao had run to the front to personally command the troops. Tin Ano really did not know any of the other Tang generals. Fortunately, he remembered the names of the two soldiers and shouted for them. These two men were Su Yixing's personal guards. They were indeed guarding nearby. As soon as they heard her shout, they immediately ran over. Tin Ano said, "In front of the great enemy, the brave will live, the fearful will die. What's the use of being afraid? Tell our brothers to puff out their chests and sing a song to boost our courage." Here. Tin Ano didn't know what songs they usually sang, but he knew that there must be military songs in the army. Sure enough, Guzhou and Liang Xi gave the order. A moment later, a mighty and majestic song resounded through the snowy plains. The royal wind of the four seas has been subdued, and the waters have been clear for 1,000 years. The military uniform has not been worn, and today I have succeeded. Looking back at Chin Pass, which was as low as a horse, he could see the Yellow River flowing straight north. Heaven's might has swept through the Jade Gate Fortress. The Hu people have sung for 10,000 li. The royal wind of the four seas has been subdued, and the waters have been clear for 1,000 years. The military uniform has not been worn, and today I have succeeded. The Lord has begun a new era of prosperity. The subjects have been loyal to the Lord. After the revolution, it will be a peaceful autumn. Groups of warriors raise their spears, bows, sabers, and even clash their weapons and shields. Beating the rhythm, they use their rough and heroic voices to sing the mighty, great battle formation music. The song carried a heroic air and immediately boosted the morale of the soldiers. Amidst the song, a black line appeared on the distant snowy plains. Amidst the song, the black line turned into a surging torrent. Amidst the song, the horses were like dragons, the men like tigers, and the hoofbeats were like war drums. Amidst the song, the Turkic warriors raised their gleaming sabers high, forming a forest of gleaming blades. Amidst the song, the crossbowmen and archers released the arrows they had been preparing for a long time. Some fired horizontally, some fired backwards, and the arrows rained down on the charging Turkic army like a storm. The shields of the cavalry were like umbrellas, incapable of blocking the sudden storm. The Turkic soldiers charging at the very front were cut down like wheat. The ground was littered with corpses. The horses that had lost their owners no longer ran forward with all their might, blocking the path of the knights behind them, causing their charge to slow down slightly. The corners of Xiao Ningfeng's mouth curled up into a sinister smile. He waved his hand down fiercely and shouted, "Shoot again!" With a wave of his banner, a second volley of arrows was fired. Once again, the Turkic army closed the distance between them, and at the same time, a large number of them were killed. The corpses and masterless warhorses caused the speed of their attacks to slow down. Their original speed was unstoppable, but at this moment they no longer had the momentum that could intimidate one's courage to resist, and the originally sharp offensive formation had also begun to fall into disarray. The Turkic cavalry commander bellowed, and the charging Turkic cavalry suddenly split to the left and right, charging into the vast snowy plains. From the looks of it, they were going to form an arc to pincer the flanks of the Tang army, while the advancing Turkic cavalry continued to attack from the middle. Seeing this, Xiao Ningfeng could not help but reveal a proud smile. He ordered loudly. With a wave of the war flag, the Tang army on the left and right flanks expanded into an arc shape, protecting the two flanks of the army. They knocked their arrows and waited for the next attack. Like two sharp scimitars, the two groups of Turkic cavalry ran diagonally away from the main road, following an arc to the snowy plains. If their original position was the starting point, the arc would end at the center of the retreating Tang army. It seemed that they also knew that the Tang army at the back was the weakest, and at the same time they cut off the long line of Tang army, which was equivalent to cutting off the Tang army's escape route. At that time, the Tang army on two legs would not be able to escape in this vast snowy plains, and could only be slaughtered. The two groups of Turkic cavalry were brandishing their whips, desperately whipping their mounts. However, no matter how much they urged, the mounts became slower and slower, as if the hooves of the horses were stuck in the mud, unable to move forward. Just as they were puzzled, with a boom, a large pit suddenly appeared in the snowy plains, and several of the cavalrymen fell into the pit along with their horses. A few of the cavalrymen behind could not stop their momentum and also fell into the pit, screaming in pain. The Turkic cavalry was somewhat startled, and their charge immediately slowed down. However, this situation did not disappear, and the snowy plains on both sides continued to collapse, like the giant mouth of a monster, suddenly opening up and sucking in a few men and horses. This situation was too terrifying, and they had no idea what they were facing, and no one knew when it would happen. The frenzied Turkic cavalry reined in their horses in fear as they stared at the flat, snowy plains in front of them. The pure, white snow stretched as far as the eye could see, and the wind had smoothed the snow until it was as smooth as a mirror. There was nothing out of the ordinary on the surface, but who knew if they would be swallowed up by the monster beneath the ground if they took even a single step forward? The Turkic soldiers at the front were greeted with a third volley of arrows. They had used their lives to buy a chance for their comrades behind them, but the Turkic soldiers at the back did not make good use of this opportunity. They reined in their horses and looked left and right in shock, not knowing what was going on. There were two lakes in this snowy region, the Bathing Sea and Xiutu Swamp, but these two lakes had originally been connected together. At the time, this place was called Fish Haizi, and the entire lake was massive and majestic. However, as the water source gradually dried up and land was revealed in the middle, it split into two lakes. The large expanse of the lake had been turned into saline land, and the two sides of the road that the Tang army was currently on had originally been the banks of the higher part of the lake. The road here was the least sturdy, and many of the roads looked very normal and flat, but in reality they were actually layers of sand and salt that had accumulated over the years, forming an empty space beneath them. And the empty space beneath them was not just a single layer. It was probably a honeycomb of many layers of empty space. The situation down there was extremely complicated, and it was impossible to know how deep it went. Thus, if someone were to fall down, even if they didn't die from the fall, there was nothing they could do but watch. The soldiers stationed here and the nearby commoners all knew of the situation in this ghost region, so they didn't dare to approach. Thus, when Xiao Ningfeng saw them charge toward the ghost region of death, a smug smile appeared on his face. In this sort of wretched place, even a shepherd boy leading a sheep could disappear with a boom, and these Turkic soldiers were galloping on top of it, so it would be strange if nothing happened to them. The panicked Turkic soldiers tried to turn their horses around and retreat, but some places were still fine when they came, with clear hoof prints on them. Who would have thought that when they turned their horses around, a huge hole would appear on the ground, swallowing both the rider and the horse? This immediately caused the Turkic soldiers to run around like headless flies. The places with hoof prints were treacherous, and the places without hoof prints were even more treacherous. They moved cautiously, afraid that if they moved too fast, they would stomp a huge hole in the ground. At this time, the soldiers on the left and right flanks calmly began to shoot. They were unhurried, accurately aiming at their targets before firing. These border army soldiers were quite skilled, and every arrow would hit its mark, knocking down the Turkic soldiers who were in a dilemma of whether to flee or fight. Seeing this scene, the Turkic soldiers on the main road also knew that there was something strange about the snowy plains on both sides, so they didn't dare to disperse their soldiers into the plains. Instead, they mobilized their strong archers to shoot at the Tang army. As soon as they drew their bows, the archers and crossbowmen of the Tang army immediately retreated. The archers with shields that were taller than a man swarmed forward and erected the big spears into a strong wall. The archers of the Tang army hid behind and shot forward through the gaps. The two sides fell into a stalemate. Sitting in the carriage, Teneno heard the battle report from the ancient boat and couldn't help but be overjoyed. Earlier on, she pretended to be vague and had already asked Liang Xir about the dangerous saline alkali ground, and she knew that the area was only 2 miles wide. Whether the Turkic cavalry came from afar or continued to retreat, it would be a headache to deal with them. The problem was that the Turkic did not know how big the area was, so they didn't dare to send their troops to test it. In this way, there were 2 natural barriers on both sides to block their pursuers, leaving only one path at the back, which was much easier to deal with. Teneno immediately ordered, "Leave the rear to deal with the enemy. The rest of the troops continue to retreat." Hearing this, Gu Zhou was shocked and asked, "General Lang, the brothers left at the rear, are we going to ignore them?" Right now, Teneno was in a good mood and couldn't help but scold with a smile, "Idiot! Retreat calmly. Do not panic. Retreat 100 steps. Get into formation and wait for the enemy. Then order the remaining troops to retreat 100 steps behind us. Get into formation and wait for the enemy. The 2 teams will repeat this cycle and slowly retreat. Also, order the couriers to quickly go to Mingwei to get reinforcements." Chapter 266. Retreating in front of the enemy was the most difficult thing to do. It was a headache for any veteran general with rich battlefield experience. A retreat could easily turn into a rout. Once it turned into a rout, even if you had millions of troops, you would be suppressed by tens of thousands of people, like a pack of wolves rushing into a flock of sheep. A smooth and orderly retreat that left no room for the enemy to take advantage of during the retreat required extremely brilliant commanding skills, as well as an extremely high prestige in the army. This way, the soldiers would have absolute trust in your command when retreating. Otherwise, the act of retreating could easily cause panic among the soldiers. Even if you were faking your defeat, it could turn into a true rout. Tin Ano was very lucky. She was caught up by the enemy just when she retreated to 2 saline alkali swamps. After the enemy saw the impenetrable hole in the sand, they did not dare to attack from the left and right flanks. The troops of both sides were crowded on the main road, and the enemy's advantage in numbers could not be used. On the other hand, although Su Yixing was a boorish man who fought by relying on his own courage and was not an outstanding general, he had a high prestige in the army, and these soldiers just had to listen to an officer like him. Although Su Yixing did not know any brilliant military strategy, he had the ability to train soldiers, and he had put in a lot of effort. Therefore, the fighting quality and military discipline of the defending troops of Flying Fox Pass were very good. In this way, Tin Ano could use the alternating retreat method and retreat boldly in front of thousands of cavalry tigers and wolves. After retreating 100 steps, they stopped to set up the formation and supported the comrades who stayed behind to defend the enemy. Although it made the advance of the army extremely slow, this was the only thing they could do. They were infantry fighting, and if they were too far away from the comrades who stayed behind, they would not be able to support them. Before the comrades who stayed behind could retreat to the front, they would be killed by the enemy. And 100 steps was also a distance where their crossbows could exert their power. They could use their crossbows to suppress the enemy here and support the comrades who stayed behind to retreat. In this way, a strange scene appeared on the battlefield. On the white snowfield, the troops of both sides lined up in a long line and stood orderly along a road, not daring to cross the line to either side. On this road, the Tang army took turns to cover the retreat. Every 100 steps the vanguard took, they would raise their shields and draw their bows, ready for battle. The comrades who stayed behind to defend against the enemy slowly retreated to the back of their comrades who had already rearranged their formation. Then, they rearranged their formation 100 steps away. The comrades who were originally in charge of supporting them had now become the soldiers fighting on the front lines. They continued to retreat. The two teams crossed each other, but they were always within the effective killing range of the crossbows at the rear, under the suppression of the dense rain of arrows. By the time the enemy rushed to the front of the shield team, the retreating soldiers had already repositioned themselves 100 steps away. Along the way, with every rotation and attack, there would be corpses of soldiers from both sides on the road. Blood dyed the snow-white ground red. Looking from above, it looked like plum blossoms were embroidered on the white silk carpet. The old branches were still extending into the boundless distance, and the plum blossoms continued to decorate it. In this way, one side slowly retreated, and the other side slowly approached. It was like a vigilant hunter facing a pack of fierce wolves, retreating step by step in the confrontation. The situation was extremely dangerous, but before one side launched the final attack at all costs, it was relatively calm before the decisive battle. In the distance, a sentry troop galloped over. This troop came from behind the Turks, who were like wolves, and they were the 2nd Turkic Cavalry Corps, with a total strength of more than 3,000 men. The commander-in-chief was a Dakejan under Muin. After hearing the situation of the battle in front, this Dakejan could not restrain his anger and almost beheaded his vanguard. The battle had actually turned out to be like this. If he just watched the Tang army safely retreat to the Mingwei garrison, he would become the laughingstock of the entire grassland. This Dakejan ordered the cavalry to attack with all their might at all costs. Even if they had to use human lives, they had to pave a way out. At the same time, he ordered dozens of cavalry to separate to the left and right of the snowfield. He did not believe that there were potholes everywhere that could collapse at any time. Similarly, he intended to pave a way out even if he had to sacrifice human lives. At this time, the Ming army had already retreated another 10 miles out of the saline alkali pothole area. The Turkic soldiers who stepped onto the snowfield with trepidation first cautiously probed, and then lightly galloped back and forth. When they found nothing out of the ordinary, their courage finally grew, and they rode back and forth on the snowfield. After circling a few rounds, they ran back and excitedly reported to the Dakigen. This Dakigen had already seen the scene of them playing around in the snow. Without waiting for their report, he ordered the vanguard with the iron bow to atone for his crime, and led his men to attack the Tang army from the left and right of the Tang army in order to tear a gap in the Tang army's defensive line. While the Turks were probing the ground on the left and right, they had already launched an attack on the Tang army at the back, disregarding the sacrifices. Tin Ano could not help but secretly sigh when she heard the constant reports from her bodyguards. She knew that it was impossible to retreat easily. Stop advancing, get into formation, and prepare for close combat. With the order, all the officers and soldiers knew that it was the most dangerous moment. They immediately rushed to prepare. The injured soldiers were helped to the middle of the formation. An entire perimeter was set up in a tight defensive line. Those soldiers with arrows in their shoulders and bleeding from their wounds did not give up fighting. The Tang army was made up of archers, and they could no longer fight in close combat, so they picked up their war bows. At this stage of the battle, the blood in every man's heart was stimulated, and no one showed the slightest bit of fear. Tin Ano gently lifted the curtain of the sedan chair and quietly looked at Yang Fan's back, her eyes full of nostalgia. Her mission had come to an end. The next battle would depend on the bravery and struggle of the entire army. It was no longer a battle of wits. She did not know what the outcome of this battle would be. She also did not know if she and he would be able to leave this place alive under the bite of this pack of wolves. Her only regret was that she had finally fallen in love with a man. She had finally experienced the kind of happiness that a woman felt when she fell in love with a man. It was like drinking wine, but the time was so short. She hadn't enjoyed even a moment of romance. She hadn't even heard him say, "I love you," to her. Yang Fan listened to the faint sounds of battle, and his hand that was gripping the reins was almost sweating. The battle was imminent, and it was unknown whether they could escape safely. He knew that the Tian Ai Nu had joined in because of him, otherwise she would not have been in danger again and again. He also knew why the Tian Ai Nu had joined in because of him. This debt was too deep and too heavy, and he feared that he would never be able to repay it in his lifetime, and might not even have the chance to do so. For Yang Fan, who did not forget to repay even a drop of kindness, it was really difficult to bear. And at this moment, no matter what he thought, he could not change the situation in front of him. Yang Fan let out a long breath and exhaled a cloud of white mist. He slowly turned his head, and the curtain of the sedan chair was slightly swaying, and it was quiet inside. Yang Fan secretly swore in his heart, "No matter what, I will do my best to protect you. As long as I am here, you will be safe." The hand-to-hand combat began, and the Tang army formed a rectangular formation on the road. When the Turkic cavalry rushed in front of them, the archers and crossbowmen pulled out their swords and spears, and together with the other soldiers of the vanguard, formed the first line of defense. At this time the wind was not strong, but the enemies and themselves were fighting with all their might, and it was like a cold wind on the snowfield. The fighting spirit that had been accumulated during the shooting and the stalemate suddenly exploded, and both the generals and the soldiers were crazy. They raised their spears and halberds, brandished their swords and sabers, roared, and shouted. Like ferocious tigers, they madly pounced on their enemies, and a fierce melee began. Because the Tang army adopted a relatively tight battle formation, the first line of fighting space was limited, and the second echelon of soldiers could only clench their weapons and stare at the front, ready to enter the battle at any time. This kind of hand-to-hand combat was far more convenient than fighting on the ground, and the Turkic also dismounted, holding all kinds of weapons, and began to fight with the Tang army. Both sides fought with all their might, and the ground had been trampled into mud, and blood was constantly sprayed. It was also trampled by countless feet, and there was no time to freeze it. General Lang, the vanguard, suffered heavy casualties and can't hold on any longer. Deputy General Shao staggered to the front of the carriage with a broken arrow in his shoulder and a bloody long saber in his hand. There was a moment of silence in the carriage, and then Su Yixing's voice came out. Vanguard, retreat and rest. Battle team, advance! Xiao Ningfeng said loudly, General Lang, do you want our cavalry to push forward? Su Yixing's deep voice came out from the carriage. It's not time yet. General Lang? There was no more sound in the carriage. Xiao Ningfeng stomped his feet, turned around, and shouted to the flag bearer, Vanguard, retreat and rest. Battle team, advance! At this time, Xiao Ningfeng was already suspicious of Su Yixing's refusal to show up, but he was only suspicious of Su Yixing's current condition, and still did not suspect that the person in the carriage was not their General Lang. At this time, the battle was urgent, and even if he had doubts in his heart, he did not have time to find out. The battle team, which was formed by jumping soldiers and ambushing soldiers, was already ready. At Su Yixing's order, they immediately rushed forward and took over their comrades' positions. The exhausted vanguard soldiers quickly supported and dragged their injured comrades, and quickly retreated to stop the bleeding, bandage their wounds, and rest. The rotation of the troops caused the stalemate between the two sides to be like a tide crashing against a rock. The Turkic army was like the rising tide, taking advantage of the Tang army's withdrawal to take a step forward. However, they were immediately pushed back by the Tang army, who had gained a firm foothold. The Turkic great Qi Jin rode on his horse, looking at the situation from afar. He saw that his men were wearing heavy leather robes and boots, and that their movements were getting slower and slower. Knowing that their physical strength was reaching its limit, he immediately ordered for another battle. Both sides exchanged for fresh troops, using fresh blood and lives to strengthen their positions. At this time, they could not take another step back, because a step back would mean total collapse, and collapse would mean total annihilation. Every soldier on the front line was using their lives to fight for survival, time and opportunity for themselves and their comrades. But would this opportunity come? Chapter 267. The Turks were like a pack of wolves, surrounding the Tang army tightly. Both sides fought fiercely, and corpses littered the ground. Deputy General Xiao carried his long saber and ran back to the carriage with heavy footsteps. His face was covered in sweat and blood. He angrily shouted into the carriage, General Lang, our brothers in the battle team have all died. Let the garrison troops go. No, the garrison cannot move. Let all the brothers in the vanguard charge forward. No matter what, we must hold the Turks here and not allow them to take another step forward. General Lang, do you hear me? Yes. Hold the Turks there and do not allow them to take another step forward. Deputy General Xiao roared, dragged his long saber, and shouted, Brothers in the vanguard, charge with me! Then he rushed to the front. As the third echelon and the last reserve force, the garrison soldiers and more than 1,000 cavalrymen stared at this side, hoping that General Lang would give the order for them to rush up and replace their brothers. However, the carriage just sat there quietly and did not move at all. Teneno could not let them go up. It was easy to stack all these people here. Everyone could have a good fight. Killing one was worth it. Killing two was worth it. However, her goal was to bring these people back to Mingwei Garrison. If they could fight one-on-one here, with the help of Mingwei Garrison's sturdy fortress, they would be able to fight 1-on-10. This was also the reason why they tried so hard to preserve this force. Therefore, this reserve force must not be used. If the reinforcements could arrive in time, then this reserve force, which was full of energy, would bear the heavy responsibility of covering the retreat of the entire army. If they were to fight until they were exhausted, then the more than 2,000 reinforcements from the Mingwei garrison would not have the strength to protect the entire army. Now what Teneno was most worried about was how the Mingwei garrison would choose. If the reinforcements did not come, then the entire army would be buried here. Although she and Yang Fan were skilled, whether they could escape from the thousands of soldiers was also an inestimable thing. Teneno sat in the carriage, so nervous that she could not breathe, like a fish out of water, Her chest was suffocating. She wanted to get out of the carriage and take a few breaths of fresh air, but she could not. If she went out at this time, people would know that General Su had died and the whole army would immediately collapse. Teneno took a deep breath. That nervous breath was heard by Yang Fan, who was sitting outside the carriage. He was still sitting on the shaft of the carriage, but one hand gently reached into the carriage from under the curtain. Teneno was like a drowning person who saw a helping hand and grabbed his hand. His big hand was a little cold, but it was steady and strong. Holding Yang Fan's hand, Teneno's nervous heart seemed to be comforted by a magical force and gradually calmed down. Yang Fan felt that her little hand was cold and her palm was full of sweat. He could not help but hold it tightly with pity. General Su, Lang Jiang. Guzhou rolled and crawled over. Yang Fan heard the shout and wanted to pull his hand back, but Teneno held it tightly and said to the window, "Speak." Guzhou said in a sobbing tone, "General Su, Deputy General Xiao has died in battle. More than half of the brothers in the vanguard and battle squads are dead or injured. The remaining brothers are exhausted and cannot hold on any longer. General Su, please give the order for the garrison to go up, otherwise the brothers in front will all die." Teneno was silent for a moment and asked, "Is there still no news of reinforcements?" Guzhou said no. Not even a shadow can be seen. "Go. Garrison, go. Vanguard and battle squads, retreat to rest. Order the cavalry to prepare. After the time it takes for an incense to burn, the whole army will counterattack. Counterattack." Guzhou was stunned. They still had the strength to counterattack? Teneno said in a powerful voice, "Yes, counterattack. The whole army will press forward and counterattack. The brothers in the cavalry will charge towards Ming Wei's garrison. We will cover the rear." Guzhou understood. His lips moved a little, and he replied in a loud voice, "Yes." Guzhou puffed out his chest and strode away. Teneno suddenly lifted a corner of the sedan curtain and called out in a low voice, "Erlang!" Yang Fan turned his head to look. Teneno frowned and said softly, "Erlang, we may lose our lives here today." Yang Fan subconsciously tightened his grip on the hilt of his saber and said word by word, "Anu, as long as I am still breathing, I will definitely protect you." Teneno slowly raised his eyes and stared at Yang Fan. He asked softly, "You said you like me too. Is that true?" Yang Fan pursed his lips and nodded heavily. Teneno said persistently, "I want to hear you say it." Yang Fan's nose turned sour. He nodded forcefully and said, "Yes, I like you. Yang Fan, I like Anu." Teneno smiled sweetly. Her tensed body suddenly softened and leaned against the carriage wall. She sighed softly and said softly, "That's enough. Death, what's so great about it? Death, what's so great about it? Sometimes life is the most important thing in life. Sometimes life becomes the most unimportant thing in life. Whether it's one's life or the lives of others, they are all worthless. Just like now. Everyone went crazy. They were like ants. Swords and sabers flashed. When one person fell, another person would immediately take his place. Their bodies were made of flesh and blood, but at this moment they were stronger than steel. Sometimes death is really nothing. When it's time to face it, you can only charge forward." On the shaft of the carriage, Yang Fan suddenly stood up. His voice was like spring thunder. He shouted loudly, "General Lang has ordered the whole army to counterattack." The messenger standing by the side of the carriage heard Tin Eno's order and immediately raised the flag. The cavalrymen who had been standing by the side of their horses with their fists tightly clenched, their blood pumping and their eyes bloodshot, quickly mounted their horses. The soldiers who had retreated to the inner perimeter to rest, regardless of whether they were injured or not, even if they had lost an arm or a leg, as long as they could still move, they all grabbed their weapons. The bugle horn to charge sounded with a woo-woo sound. Yang Fan turned around and slowly pulled out the long saber at his waist. The saber scraped against the scabbard, giving off a sha-sha sound. He intended to wait for the entire army to counterattack before cutting off the reins and using the horses that were driving the carriages as their mounts. No matter how ferocious the Turks were, he must slaughter a path of blood. He must bring Tin Aino out alive. He owed her. The saber was raised in the air, reflecting the dazzling light of the sun. Then Yang Fan's eyes went wide as his entire body froze. There was a black dot in the distance, and in a flash that black that had transformed into a long dragon. Yang Fan's body trembled as he excitedly shouted, "The reinforcements are here! The reinforcements are here!" The reinforcements from Mingwei garrison had finally arrived. To the general of Mingwei garrison, this was a painful decision to make. He could not bear to abandon his comrades and watch as 5,000 of his brothers died on the way. But if he were to send out the 2,500 cavalry he had, not only would he fail to save the 5,000 soldiers of Flying Fox Pass, he would also have to pay the price of his men. The consequences were also not something he could bear. In the end, he chose to take a gamble. The reinforcements had arrived. Yang Fan's loud shout alarmed the soldiers around him. They all turned to look in the direction of Mingwei garrison. When they saw the war banners, the war horses, and the brightly armored riders, they couldn't help but cheer. With the sound of the bugles, the 1,500 cavalry who had been resting on the left flank pulled out their sabers. Their entire formation was like a sharp, curved horse, charging in a sharp arc toward the enemy's right flank. Based on the speed of their horses, the moment they charged in that arc toward the Turkic camp was the moment when their speed and strength were pushed to the limit. The infantry's reaction was not slower than theirs, but their speed was incomparable. They had only taken a few steps when a tsunami of cheers came from behind them. The soldiers, who were ready to charge forward with the determination to die, turned around in surprise and immediately found that their reinforcements had arrived. In the carriage, Tin Aino almost jumped out of the carriage when she heard that the reinforcements had arrived. She calmed herself and used Su Yixing's voice to call out, "Gujo, Liang Sir, arr!" Liang Sir replied, "General, please give your orders." Tin Aino said, "Raise the banner. Let the reinforcements attack the enemy's left flank from the right. All infantry, prepare to retreat." "Yes." Liang Sir acknowledged and waved the banner again. When the Mingwei garrison saw the banner, they were still 100 steps away from them when they charged into the wilderness, bypassing them and charging toward the left flank of the Turks. The sound of hooves thundered like thunder. The Mingwei garrison was like a sharp sickle, piercing into the enemy's formation with the regularity of death. The Turks suffered a loss because they did not have enough time and distance to speed up their horses. For a moment, they were thrown into disarray by the Tang army. It was only when the Tang army's charge slowed that they managed to stabilize their formation. The horses neighed and the men shouted. An evenly matched cavalry battle had begun. When the third group of the Turks arrived at the battlefield, the ground was a mess with countless corpses lying on the ground. The wind blew snow across the plains, and the ownerless war horses wandered alone. Some of the wounded soldiers were still struggling on the ground. They were about to send someone to the front to gather information when they saw the vanguard leading his troops back. It turned out that the Tang cavalry stopped the enemy and protected the infantry as they retreated until they were near the Mingwei garrison. They did not know how many Tang cavalry were left in the fort and were afraid that they would be taken advantage of if they were careless. They could only retreat, and the fat meat that was right in their mouths was lost. In the Mingwei garrison, Yi Yunbao, the commander of the White Pavilion Guards, personally welcomed him out of the city gate. The soldiers of the Flying Fox Guards were wearing broken armor covered in blood and holding shields that were covered in scars. They supported each other as they walked toward the city gate. Even though they were exhausted and covered in wounds, all the soldiers were filled with joy after surviving a disaster. Yang Fan's carriage was protected by the soldiers as it walked toward the city gate. Yang Fan drove the carriage with a bitter expression. Tin Ano gave him a difficult problem. You can't say that she took over Su Yixing's command for this retreat. If he did not say it was her, how could he explain it? Could it be that the frozen Su Yixing had been shot in the back? But if he did not agree, how could he resist her coquettish tone? Chapter 268. Is Commander Su in the carriage? Yang Fan's carriage had just arrived at the city gates when the White Pavilion commander, Yi Yunbao, quickly came forward to welcome him. Yi Yunbao's official rank was one rank higher than Su Yixing's. Due to his temperament, Yi Yunbao had never gotten along with the seemingly refined but actually crude Su Yixing. However, this time, Su Yixing's nearly perfect retreat had saved the lives of so many soldiers. Yi Yunbao sincerely admired him. In the army, although seniority and background were important, ability was always the most important. Su Yixing had displayed his ability, so even though Yi Yunbao was a high-ranking official and a fourth-rank commander of the middle court, he did not hesitate to condescend and respectfully welcome him at the city gates. Yang Fan pulled on the reins of his horse and hesitantly stopped. All around, the soldiers who had returned with him all gazed fervently at the carriage, waiting for their commander to appear. Cheers had already rushed to their throats. Is Commander Su in the carriage? Yi Yunbao frowned slightly when he saw that there was no response from the carriage. He was somewhat displeased. Yang Fan took a deep breath and jumped off the carriage. He cupped his fists and said, "This lowly subordinate is Yang Fan of the Yulin Guard's 100 Cavalry Guard. Greetings to Commander Yi." Oh, Yi Yunbao knew of the 100 Cavalry Guards, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. However, he was most concerned about Su Yixing and had no time for pleasantries. He only asked, "Is Commander Su in the carriage?" Yang Fan replied, "Yes, Commander Su is in the carriage. However, Commander Su happened to encounter the Turkic army while hunting and immediately led his bodyguards to meet the enemy. He was careless and was hit by an arrow. This subordinate did his best to rescue Commander Su, but Commander Su still died halfway." These words caused an uproar. Several of Commander Su's bodyguards rushed forward and said, "Nonsense! Our Commander Su is just ordering us to retreat. So how could he die? Commander Su! Commander Su!" As they spoke, they rushed toward the carriage. Su Yixing's voice suddenly rang out from within the carriage. "Everyone, don't make any noise. Don't be impatient." As soon as they heard this familiar voice, all the bodyguards stood up happily and called out in unison, "It's General Su!" The curtain of the sedan was lifted and Tin Ano bent over and walked out of the carriage. The soldiers looked and saw that it was a pretty girl with willowy eyebrows and almond-shaped eyes. They could not help but stare blankly. Why is there a woman hiding in the carriage? Although they were suspicious, they did not think too much about it. Their gazes swept across Tin Ano's body, and then they looked toward the carriage again, thinking that this time Su Yixing would come out. But they heard Tin Ano said, "Yang Shui's words are absolutely true." Before Su Langjiang could rush back to the Flying Fox Mouth, he passed away due to his heavy injuries. Her words were still spoken in Su Yixing's voice. Seeing this beautiful young lady, as soon as she opened her mouth, unexpectedly used a rough and bold man's voice, moreover. It was exactly the same as Su Langjiang's voice. The surrounding officers and soldiers were shocked and dumbstruck. Su Yixing's bodyguards still did not believe it. They rushed into the carriage, and in a short period of time, Su Yixing's body was carried out. Su Yixing's buttocks were not hit by an arrow. A wolf-fang arrow as thick as a chicken's egg had pierced straight into his back. Only a small part of it was still exposed. How could he have survived such an injury? When he was carried out, his entire body was frozen stiff, but he still maintained his prone position. There was no need for anyone to support his waist. His entire body was stiff and did not bend. This was not the appearance of someone who had died not long ago. Everyone was silent, dumbstruck. Yi Yunbao was experienced and knowledgeable. He was the first to recover from the shock of Su Yixing's death. He looked deeply at Teneno and asked in a deep voice, "Was it this young lady who took over Su Longjiang's command?" Teneno did not say anything. She only stared at Yang Fan with a pair of watery eyes. Yang Fan coughed and braced himself to say, "Middle Commander, the person who took over Su Longjiang's command was not this young lady." Yi Yunbao's eyebrows slightly rose. He asked, "Oh, then who was it?" Teneno glanced at Yang Fan and rushed to say, "This lowly girl is only a woman. How could I understand the art of war?" The one who mobilized the troops and commanded the battle was Guard Yang. However, this lowly girl just so happened to know how to speak. At the time, the situation was urgent. In order to appease the troops, Guard Yang asked this lowly girl to pretend to be Su Langjiang. Guard Yang sat at the front of the carriage and secretly gave this lowly girl instructions. This lowly girl was merely parroting his words. Yi Yunbao suddenly understood. In his opinion, this was also the case. How could a woman understand the art of war? Although Yang Fan was a guard, which general did not start out as a lowly soldier. Yang Fan was in the army and was also a guard of the Yulin Guard. Presumably, he had learned the art of war. Yi Yunbao's attitude toward Yang Fan immediately changed. He smiled wholeheartedly and said, "Bodyguard Yang was able to safely bring back the 5,000 men of the Flying Fox sect despite being surrounded by tigers and wolves. Your military tactics are truly outstanding. This merit is truly great. On behalf of the 5,000 men of the Flying Fox sect, I sincerely thank Bodyguard Yang." After Yi Yunbao finished speaking, he swung his scarlet beard and cupped his hands in a salute toward Yang Fan. When Yang Fan saw this, he hurriedly dodged to the side and reached out to support him. He repeatedly said, "I don't dare, I don't dare." How could Yang Fan accept the general's greeting? Yi Yunbao's thoughts were meticulous, and his shrewdness was far superior to that of a boorish fellow like Su Yixing. Although Yang Fan was a guard of the Imperial Guard, his status was worlds apart from his. There was no need for him to be so courteous to Yang Fan. However, the Yulin Guard was the Emperor's personal guard. It was easy for them to be promoted. Now that the 5,000 soldiers of the Flying Foxmouth had been brought back by Yang Fan, this merit could not be concealed even if he wanted to. Once this report reached the capital, this little guard's meteoric rise was just around the corner. Who knew what official position he would reach in the future? It was not a bad idea to form a good relationship with him first. As Teneno watched from the side, a faint smile flashed across his face. As a woman, what use did she have for this merit? Of course, she would only be happy if it was used by her man to make a name for himself. Although Yi Yunbao wanted to befriend Yang Fan, there was still a huge disparity between their statuses. It was inconvenient for him to appear overly enthusiastic. Moreover, Su Yixing's personal guard was crying bitterly over the corpse. This aftermath also needed to be taken care of. Yi Yunbao nodded to Yang Fan and walked over to comfort Su Yixing's personal guard. He led them into the city and ordered someone to go to the coffin shop to choose a good coffin to store Su Yixing's body. He then urgently summoned the brigade commanders of the Flying Foxmouth to listen to the details of the battle with the Turks and their retreat, as well as to assess the enemy's strength. At the same time, the beacons in the sky above Mingwei garrison continued to flutter. After listening to the detailed report from the general of the Flying Foxmouth garrison, Yi Yunbao immediately ordered his subordinate to write a military report to Liangzhou. He then immediately went to the city to arrange the defense and inspected the three armies, preparing to receive the first wave of attack from the Turkic army. Because Yang Fan was one of the 100 horsemen of the Featherwood Guard, his status was special, so he and Teneno were temporarily placed in the courier station of Mingwei garrison. The courier station here rarely had the opportunity to receive the ministers of the court. At most, the garrison commander of Liangzhou would temporarily stay here when he went on his 4 routine patrols every year. Normally, this place was only used by the relay soldiers and as a place to store rations. For this reason, the courier station area was very simple and the architecture was like that of a barracks. It was completely incomparable to the Huangshui courier station in the great city of Shangfu. After being led to his residence, Yang Fan saw that although the room was not large, it was clean and tidy. It wasn't long before the courier returned with fresh water. Yang Fan washed up, changed into his casual clothes, and left. When he arrived, he saw that Tin Ano's room was right next to his. When Yang Fan arrived at Tin Ano's room, he lightly knocked on the door. A moment later, footsteps could be heard. The door opened, and Tin Ano stood there looking very charming. Tin Ano was still wearing the same female shepherd clothes that she had changed into when she was rescued by the Flaming Ear tribe, but it was much cleaner. Her hair and face were washed clean, and her jet-black hair was glossy and still slightly wet. Her clear and lustrous face was bright and moving. Erlang. As soon as he saw Yang Fan, Tin Ano's heart was filled with joy, and he hurriedly invited him into the room. Yang Fan sat down in the room and said with a wry smile, "Oh, you, so what if you were the commander? Why did you deny it? You made me take credit for no reason, and my heart feels very uneasy." Tin Ano chuckled. "That little thief from back then, why is it that you don't even want to take advantage of something that was delivered to your doorstep? Why don't you think about it? I am a woman. Even if this credit is reported to the capital, do you think they will let me be a general leading the troops? If you don't take it, wouldn't it be a waste of this opportunity? Moreover, it is inconvenient for my identity to be publicized. What if they find out about young master's identity through me? What should I do then? So if you don't want this credit, I will definitely not admit it. Speaking of which, you have helped me solve a big problem, and I should thank you instead." Yang Fan touched his nose and laughed dryly. "I think everyone is willing to get involved in this kind of trouble." "Oh, right. How do you plan to deal with young Master Jiang?" This question was exactly what was on Tin Ano's mind. Tin Ano was worried about this matter. She was not worried about Shenmu secretly developing his forces in Longyu. She followed Shenmu alone, and as long as she said that she did not find anything, how would young master find out that she was lying? What she was worried about was how she could be together with Yang Fan. Originally, her identity was not up to her to decide, and she could not choose the man she liked. Moreover, Yang Fan was obviously tied to Shenmu, and Shenmu's actions were too big. Although she promised Yang Fan that she would cover up for them, young master would find out sooner or later. At that time, there would definitely be a fierce battle between young master and Shenmu. Since Yang Fan was on Shenmu's side, what should she do at that time? Today in the carriage, at the critical moment of life and death, she heard Yang Fan admit that he liked her. Tin Ano's heart was at ease, but when she thought of the obstruction from her young master, she couldn't help but worry. It would not be easy for her young master to deal with Shenmu. If the two of them were to fight, it would be a battle of wits and schemes. The clan would not allow them to use their clan's power to kill each other. Shenmu, the hidden sect patriarch, was not to be underestimated. Her young master would not dare to use assassination methods to deal with him, as it would violate the clan's taboo. However, it was different for Yang Fan. This time, she had given a great merit to Yang Fan, and after Yang Fan returned to the capital, he would definitely be promoted to a brigade marshal or even a higher official position. However, such a status was just like an ant in her young master's eyes. Her young master couldn't even be bothered to deal with him. As long as he gave the order, Yang Fan would die an inexplicable and untraceable death. A person who even dared to assassinate the current dynasty's Empress Wu. Why would he care about a small character like Yang Fan? After washing up, Tin Ano sat down in her room and pondered for a moment. She made up her mind that before settling the matter with her young master, she must not tell Yang Fan about this matter. She must not invite a fatal disaster for Yang Fan. She had to settle this matter properly before getting together with Yang Fan. Chapter 269. Tin Ano hesitated for a moment before revealing a relaxed smile, saying, "Since I have already promised you, Are you afraid that I will go back on my word? Yang Fan replied, Of course not. I am only worried that if you conceal anything from young Master Jiang, he will not harm you, right? Tin Ano's heart warmed. Shaking his head, he said, You can rest assured. Although young master has always been suspicious, he has always trusted me greatly. In this trip to the western regions to pursue Shenmue, I was the only one sent. In front of young master, I will not reveal anything. Yang Fan sighed in relief and said, That is good. Anu, this is truly hard on you. Hearing this, Tin Ano glared at him reproachfully. Just as she was about to speak, there was a light knock on the door. Someone outside called out, Miss, is Imperial Guard Yang here? Yang Fan gestured to Tin Ano and stood up to open the door. A border soldier dressed in martial attire was standing outside the door, holding a spear in his hand. Beside him was the courier from the relay station. Upon seeing Yang Fan, the soldier said, Imperial Guard Yang, the palace commander invites you for a moment. Yang Fan already knew that once this palace commander was free, he would definitely want to see him. After all, he was the one who brought the news of the Turks' attack, and there were some details that he needed to inquire about. Yang Fan turned to Tin Ano and said, Nu, I will be back soon. Tin Ano gently nodded her head and watched Yang Fan depart. She immediately stood up and sweetly said to the courier, who was also about to turn and leave, Uncle, is there any place where I can boil some hot water? Which girl did not want to dress up prettily in front of her sweetheart. However, the first time Tian Ai knew met Yang Fan, she was dressed in black and was lying in a ditch covered in blood. This time, she was dressed as a man and crossed the desert with him in the snow and wind. She wore a thick leather robe and was covered in yellow sand and dust. She wanted to take advantage of this rare opportunity to dress herself up nicely and cleanly. Yang Fan followed the soldier out of the relay station, but did not go to the palace commander's residence. Instead, he went directly to Qianmen Street. Upon reaching Qianmen Street and seeing the tall city gates, Yang Fan guessed that Palace Commander Yi must be arranging the defenses. Yang Fan followed the soldier to the side of the city gate. Following the military path up the city gate tower, he saw many soldiers busily moving boxes of arrows, barrels of kerosene, big crossbows, wolf teeth up the city wall, or installing and wiping them. Yang Fan saw Yi Yunbao at the battlement in front of the gate tower. Yi Yunbao seemed to be giving some orders, and there were a few generals beside him. After Yi Yunbao finished giving his orders, the generals left one after another. Yi Yunbao turned his head and saw Yang Fan, so he walked over. Yang Fan hurriedly stood still and cupped his fists. Palace Commander! Yi Yunbao waved his hand and said, No need to stand on ceremony. I have already asked Flying Fox Pass Garrison General, and the information you sent is very important. Although Su Yixing was too cautious and did not believe it, your contribution cannot be buried. At the same time, you thought of a way to impersonate Su Yixing and replace him in commanding the garrison at Flying Fox Pass to return safely. This is a great contribution. I have already reported this matter to Liangzhou, and I believe it will be reported to Luoyang soon. Yang Fan bowed and said, Many thanks to Palace Commander. Yi Yunbao smiled and said, I already know that 100 cavalry of the Featherwood Guard have gone to the western regions on official business. Just now, I specially ordered people to investigate the official letters related to you. It seems that you have been missing for a long time. Your captain, Huang Xuchang, even asked the Shanzhou government to send letters to various places to investigate your whereabouts. Yang Fan said, Yes, I was originally going to the Hushi region to gather information, but I accidentally ran into the Turks and heard that they intend to attack White Pavilion, so I came here. Yi Yunbao said, Tomorrow I will send someone to escort you to the Liangzhou government and take the road to Luojing from there. What do you think? Yang Fan said, Thank you for your trouble, General Yi. But where are my companions now? Yi Yunbao said, When the official letters came, they were still at the Huangshui. I do not know where they are now, Yang Fan said, "Since that's the case, I will go to Liangzhou first. Once I have news of them, I will make my move." Yang Fan had once said to Huang Xuchang and the others, "If there is merit, I will not take it for myself. If I return to Luoyang now and leave Huang Xuchang and the others at the Huang Shui, what would that mean? Even if I wanted to share the merit with them, it would be impossible, so I have this plan." Yi Yunbao indifferently said, "You can make your own arrangements for your journey. This general will send someone to escort you safely to Liangzhou." After Yang Fan expressed his thanks, Yi Yunbao said, "Although Su Langjiang did not believe the news of the Turks' attack and wasted an opportunity to make early preparations, the information you obtained isn't completely useless. I want to know how many soldiers the Turks have sent this time, who their commander is, which tribes are participating, and what is the relationship between them. Do you understand these things?" Yang Fan replied, "This lowly one knows a thing or two. I will report it all to General." Yang Fan told Yi Yunbao what he had learned about the two armies, the three commanders, and the strength of the major tribes involved. He especially described the conflict between the Ashina tribe and the Ashina tribe in great detail. Yi Yunbao listened attentively, unwilling to miss a single detail. At this time, Mu En and Mu Si's forces had already set up camp at Flying Fox Pass. The yurts spread out for 10 Li Mu En, and Mu Si had around 50,000 men. And besides these people, they also had tens of thousands of cattle and sheep, which were their rations. At the same time, they had circled around the edge of the desert, taking a detour from the Miquelchuan River. This way, they could resupply themselves with fodder from the tribes garrisoned there. Thus, they did not move very quickly. They could not march in a straight line through the desert to Flying Fox Pass. The cattle, sheep, and horses could not withstand the extreme cold of the desert at night. Moreover, they could not bring the fodder and drinking water needed by the tens of thousands of livestock. If they had come from the desert, all the cattle, sheep, and horses would have died in 10 days. The camp, fodder, and firewood at Flying Fox Pass had all been burned down by the Tang army. However, Mu En and Mu Si still chose this place as their encampment because the terrain was suitable for setting up camp. Although this place was a little far from the Mingwei garrison, they could not immediately surround it because they still lacked siege weapons. Flying Fox Pass was on 2 hillsides, and not far from it was a forest. They could use the local materials to build a large number of scaling ladders, nest carts, catapults, trench bridges, battering rams, and other siege weapons. At the same time, they could wait for the other army, led by Zhu Tu, to arrive. Zhu Tu's journey to the Gobi Desert was further than theirs. Moreover, he needed to send light cavalries to feign an attack on Jianhai, so he would arrive later than them. By the time Zhu Tu arrived, the Mun Kingdom would have produced a large number of siege weapons. Mu En and Zhu Tu's plan was rather efficient. Since Yang Fan wanted to tell Yi Yunbao the news, he had to mention what he had done in Shui, Yantua City. The information he mentioned was very detailed and important because he had once impersonated Mu Si and heard Mu En's instructions. These secrets were not easily understood by outsiders. Yi Yunbao was a very steady and vigilant general. Not only did he have to analyze the value of the information Yang Fan mentioned, but he also had to analyze the authenticity of Yang Fan's information. It was not that he doubted Yang Fan's identity. If Yang Fan was a fake, he would not need to protect so many Flying Fox Pass soldiers and strengthen the Mingwei garrison's defense. He only needed to lead the few remaining soldiers and escape back. Besides, if the Turks wanted to work together, sending 1 or 2 people in would be useless. Yi Yunbao was worried about whether the information Yang Fan had gathered was reliable. If that was the case, Yang Fan would have no choice but to tell him that he had impersonated Mu Si. Yi Yunbao was already amazed when he heard that Yang Fan looked the same as Ashina Mu Si, the son of Silent Shui. When he heard the thrilling story, he was even more amazed. This time, he believed Yang Fan's information without a doubt. Yi Yunbao praised, "Amazing, truly amazing. You are young, brave, and intelligent. Today, when you led the Flying Fox Pass soldiers to retreat, You also displayed brilliant military tactics. Such a talented young man will have a limitless future." Yang Fan felt guilty and repeatedly said that he did not dare. Yi Yunbao saw that he was humble and polite and had a good impression of him. He could not help but praise him, saying, "This information is very important. The flames of war have been lit. I believe that Liangzhou will soon send reinforcements. When the time comes, I will have a good discussion with the commander of the reinforcements to see how we can make use of the information you have provided." Yang Fan looked at the tense situation on the walls and worriedly asked, "The Turkic army of 100,000 is surging over. Can this garrison of Ming Wei be defended?" Yi Yunbao calmly said, "In this world there has never been an impregnable fortress that cannot be breached. Whether the garrison of Ming Wei can be defended or not depends on the strength of both sides, the strength of the commander, the use of tactics by the commander, whether reinforcements can arrive in time, and luck." He held on to the battlement and looked out at the vast snowy plains outside the city. There were many messy horse tracks and hoof prints on the snowy plains. Because the sun was setting in the west and twilight was deep, the originally bright and beautiful snow had become dim. The places that had been trampled on seemed to have withered into mud. Yi Yunbao pointed at the bottom of the city and said to Yang Fan, "Ever since this garrison was built during the reign of Emperor Taizong, it has been attacked 5 times and successfully defended 7 times. Whether it can be defended this time, we'll know in a few days." Yi Yunbao's manner of speaking had always been very calm, and his expression and demeanor were both dignified and gentle. Only these 2 cold chuckles at this moment had some of the coldness and sternness of a great general of the border. Yang Fan frowned. "Have they never counterattacked?" Yi Yunbao took a deep breath and then exhaled a cloud of white mist. Shaking his head, he said, "The Turks are vicious, but they are not reckless. There is no lack of intelligent and scheming people among their leaders. Moreover, their soldiers are all cavalry. They come like arrows and leave like a broken bowstring. They can fight and leave as they please. Chase? That's too difficult." Yang Fan frowned and looked out at the vast plains. "Are we really going to have to passively take a beating?" Chapter 270. When Yang Fan left the gate tower, he did not ask Yi Zhonglong to send him off. He had already memorized the route he had taken. Yi Yunbao busied himself on the walls. From the looks of it, he would be spending the night there. Who knew when the Turks would arrive? No one had swept the snow on the streets, but there was a lot of ash and dirt on it, so even though the snow was very firm, it did not feel slippery. Yang Fan slowly walked down the street. He had arrived in a hurry and did not pay attention to his surroundings. Only now did he realize that the new year seemed to have just ended in this small city. There were still fireworks on the streets, but they had been crushed by the hooves of horses and carriages and were now stuck to the snow. The residences and shops on both sides of the street still had peach talismans and other auspicious objects hanging on them. There were many people on the streets, all of them in a hurry. The commoners already knew that the Turks would soon launch an attack. Many of them closed their businesses and packed up their belongings, preparing to flee to Liangzhou the next day. If the Mingwei garrison was really breached, the next target would be Liangzhou. They could not possibly flee to the ends of the earth, and these commoners did not have the ability to do so. Some of them were unwilling to leave. They had lived here for generations, so where could they go? They did not have the ability to make a living elsewhere, nor did they have the ability to take care of the old and young. These people placed their hopes on the garrison. Even though they were uneasy, they continued to live their lives. There were many people on the streets. Regardless of whether they were Han, Uyghurs, Khitans, Changs, or Tibetans, most of them were busy preparing to evacuate the next day. This included the Turks who lived in the area. When the Turks charged into the city, they would not show mercy just because they were Turks. For the sake of the grasslands, the Turks fought with the various tribes, killing each other to the death. Who cared if the Turks in the Mingwei garrison were of the same race? Everything was for their own survival. They had no concept of race in their hearts. At the intersection, Yang Fan saw a small eatery. It was still open for business, and the steaming cauldrons brought a hint of peace and tranquility to the chaotic scene. The snack bar sold hubing, pasta, and other snacks. There were also some people who were hungry after a busy day eating there. Yang Fan stopped and looked at the shopkeeper. He was a man in his early 50s, his hair graying and his face bitter. Even though business was knocking on his door, his forced smile could not conceal the worry on his face. The Turks were about to reach the walls, so who could remain indifferent? The entire city was oppressive, and this atmosphere had unknowingly affected Yang Fan, causing his footsteps to become increasingly heavy. When Yang Fan returned to his place, Tin Ano immediately ran over and greeted him happily. "Hi!" Tin Ano had already taken a bath. Just as she had hoped, she looked fragrant and clean. There was no rouge or makeup on her face. Because she had just taken a shower, there was a natural blush on her cheeks. There was no lipstick on her lips, so her youthful and tender lips were naturally tender and moist. She was still wearing that woman's nomadic robe, but she had tidied it up very cleanly. The lapels were also neat and the belt was tightly fastened, showing off her slender waist as much as possible. She had her hands behind her back as she looked at Yang Fan with a smile. Her jade-like skin was soft and smooth, and her thin and clear skin was both attractive and lovely. Because he was preoccupied, Yang Fan did not notice Tin Ano's beautiful face. He only warmly smiled at her and asked, "I am back. Have you eaten?" Not receiving praise from her sweetheart, not even the slightest bit of surprise, Tin Ano's shoulders immediately slumped. Like a child who was waiting for praise but did not get it, she slightly pouted and said unhappily, "Not yet. The food is here. I wanted to wait for you to come back to eat together, but it's already cold. I will get the courier to heat it up." Yang Fan said, "I will go find it." "Right, let's go to Liangzhou tomorrow." "Oh," Tin Ano responded listlessly. Yang Fan stood at the entrance of the courtyard and shouted a few times, but no one answered. Tin Ano suddenly remembered something and said to him, "Oh, I remember now. The courier has been called to the warehouse in the west. I heard that they are going to distribute military rations to the 4 cities." Yang Fan said, "Oh, then let's go out to eat. Do you want to wear more clothes?" Tin Ano pouted and said, "I am not cold." Yang Fan smiled and said, "Then let's go." The place Yang Fan took her to was the snack bar he had seen at the intersection. When Tin Ano was led to the front of the shop, her eyes slightly curved when she saw the steaming hot soup pot. In the soup pot, the noodles that looked like little fish were flipping up and down in the boiling water, swimming happily, and the thick fragrance of the noodles assailed her nostrils. Tin Ano couldn't help but think of the day she was saved by Yang Fan, the bowl of pasta soup that she had belittled to be worthless, the toothbrush that had lost its hair, and that sunny morning Tin Ano's heart warmed. She secretly glanced at Yang Fan and thought contentedly, "Although this guy has eyes but can't see and can't bear to praise me, but his mind is still quite meticulous." When Yang Fan and Tin Ano walked into the shop, there was only one customer left. That person didn't order anything other than a bowl of pasta soup. Probably because the Turks were about to arrive and the soldiers were in a panic, that person didn't have the mood to stay outside for long. In the time it took Yang Fan and Tin Ano to order a few dishes and snacks, that person had already finished his bowl of pasta and left in a hurry. Of course, the food that Tin Ano ordered included pasta. This thing was filled with too many beautiful and sweet memories of hers. Who would have thought that the unscrupulous thief who climbed the wall to steal would become the most adorable lover in her heart today? As Tin Ano ate a mouthful of pasta, she glanced at Yang Fan. Thinking back to the memories of the two of them together, that bowl of pasta was even sweeter than honey. Yang Fan picked up a mouthful of braised lamb face and looked at Tin Ano, saying, "Why are you only eating noodles? There are so many dishes. You should eat some as well. Is your stomach still not recovered?" "Not at all." With a smile, Tin Ano automatically took Yang Fan's words as her sweetheart's thoughtfulness towards her. She sweetly said, "This soup is clear and fresh. The texture is chewy and fragrant. I like it." As she spoke, her smiling eyes glanced at Yang Fan. It was unknown if she also felt that this pretty gentleman in front of her. "The soup is clear and fresh. The texture is chewy and fragrant. The texture is chewy and fragrant." Seeing that there were no more customers, the shopkeeper also returned to the shop. Just as he sat down at an empty table, a smile appeared on his tired face when he heard Tin Ano's words. He happily said, "Miss, you really know your stuff. This old man is not good at anything else. But when it comes to making noodles, not to mention in the Ming Dynasty, no one in Liang province can compare." Tin Ano pursed her lips into a smile and said to him, "Yes, shopkeeper's words are not an exaggeration. This little girl is also good at cooking, but it is very difficult for me to make noodles with such a good texture. It's just that your seasoning is a bit lacking, and the taste of the side dishes is also average." The shopkeeper awkwardly laughed and said, "Who said it wasn't so? This old man is indeed not good at cooking. If not for this, I would not be reduced to this state." Hearing this, Yang Fan couldn't help but ask, "Old man, the Turkic army is approaching and everyone is busy preparing to escape to Liang province. Since old man is from Liang province, it should be easier for you to settle down there. But why do I see that you don't seem to have any intention of leaving?" The shopkeeper sighed. "My old wife is ill, and this old man's legs are weak. I only have one daughter at home, and she has long been married off. What are we going to do? Let's just hope that the imperial army can defend the Ming Dynasty. If the Turks really enter the city at my age, if I die, then so be it. This old man does not have the face to return to Liang province." Yang Fan and Tin Ano looked at each other. They knew that this old man must have a sad story on his mind, so the two obediently did not ask any more questions. The old man seemed to be very talkative, or perhaps he did not have much hope for the imperial army to defend the Ming Dynasty and felt that his death was imminent, so he wanted to pour his heart out to someone. Without waiting for the two to ask, he continued, "Back then, my brother and I opened a restaurant in Liang province. I was good at making noodles, and he was good at grilling. Our business was very prosperous. My brother was not my biological brother, but our two families had been friends since our ancestors. This old man doesn't know when it started, but since my grandfather's generation, our two families have been as close as one family. Our restaurant's business was very good. Few people in Liang province could compete with us. Whenever it was time to eat, customers would line up in front of our restaurant, but the restaurants next to it would be empty." Seeing that the shopkeeper had said it himself, Tin Ano couldn't help but ask, "If that's the case, why did old man move here and just open a small snack shop?" The shopkeeper smiled mournfully and said, "I was schemed against." He was silent for a moment, then faintly said, "The food of the other restaurants couldn't compare to mine no matter how well they cooked. We were forced to close down, so how could we not hate them? They just wanted to punish us. Our two families lived next to each other. There was a big stone roller in front of our door. Our ancestors pooled money to buy it and used it to roll rice and wheat in autumn. Later, our business grew bigger and bigger, so we didn't grow our own food anymore. That stone roller had no use, so we just left it there. In any case, it was so heavy that we weren't afraid of people stealing it. Later on, a merchant came. It was probably the first time he had seen such a rare toy, so he insisted on buying it at a high price. He offered 10 hangs. That broken toy wasn't even worth a hangs. At that time, my wife happened to be at the door, and as soon as she heard the price the other party offered, she was tempted. It was just a stone roller, and it was rare to meet a foreigner who didn't understand anything. So she sold it to him. It's not a big deal to sell it. It's just that my wife was possessed for a moment and thought that the stone roller wasn't worth much. If she kept this a secret, she would be able to take advantage of it. She would go back and tell my brother's wife that someone happened to buy the stone roller and sold it for a whole string of money and gave her half of it." Hearing this, Yong Fan vaguely understood. He couldn't help but exclaim in admiration, "What a good plan to sow discord! This was done by your enemy, wasn't it?" The shopkeeper slapped his thigh and said, "Who said it wasn't? My wife wanted to conceal this matter, but that merchant insisted on going to our restaurant to eat, and even had people roll that stone roller there, and loudly showed off to the others. In the end, they told him that the object was not worth 2 chien. He turned pale with fright and said that he had spent no less than 1,000 chien to buy it. At first, my brother and I thought it was a joke, but when he told us which family he bought it from, we were glad that we met a dumb foreigner. In the end, when we returned home, my brother naturally heard from his family that he only got half a hangs. My wife had no choice but to tell the truth, saying that he only received 10 hangs. But that guy didn't believe her. There is no good way to fight and no good words to scold. In the end, my brother's wife was so angry that she scolded, "If you tell a lie, you will die without descendants." And coincidentally, my family only has one daughter, and she doesn't have a head. At this point, the old shopkeeper's eyes were filled with remorseful tears. This hit me where it hurts. I was also really angry, so I rushed up and hit her. In the end, us 2 brothers also fought. Naturally, our business split up. We each only specialized in one thing. So once we split up, it wouldn't be good for the customers to buy half of the food and the other half, right? Our business became worse and worse. But we still couldn't accept it and continued to put up a front. We wanted to compete with our former brothers. But in the end, we also squandered the family business that our ancestors had saved up. Later, after the shopkeeper of the restaurant got drunk, he told others about this matter. When the news spread, we realized that we had been tricked. Tin Ano listened attentively and couldn't help but ask, "Since you already know the truth, why don't you work together again and open a restaurant together?" The old shopkeeper glanced at her and lightly shook his head, saying, "Little girl, you are too naive. There are some things that you can't make up for just knowing that you have fallen into someone else's trap. Can you forget the harm you have suffered in the past? If it wasn't because of remorse, how could my wife have fallen so ill? What has already happened? How can it be so easy to go back to the past?" At this point, the old shopkeeper laughed self-mockingly and sighed deeply, saying, "People all have weaknesses. It doesn't matter if they are father, son, brothers, or friends. As long as they have the intention, even a broken stone can destroy the relationship between you two." Yong Fan and Tin Ano fell silent. When they paid the bill and bid farewell to the old man, they looked at this stooped old man with a face full of wrinkles and a head full of white hair. When they thought of his past glory in Liangzhou and the harmonious relationship he had with his friends, they couldn't help but sigh. By the time the 2 returned to the post house, the sky was already dark. Tin Ano stood by the door and turned to look at Yong Fan. There were lanterns hanging in the corridor, and Yong Fan looked at Tin Ano's charming face under the light. He couldn't help but say, "You are so beautiful today." Tin Ano couldn't help but burst into laughter. She rolled her eyes at him and said, "You are only willing to say it now." Although Yong Fan said it a little late, the praise from her sweetheart still filled her heart with joy. When she closed the door and slowly walked to the bed, she was beaming with joy and her footsteps were as light as a happy swallow. Tin Ano lit the stove and took off her outer robe, leaving only her undergarments. Just as she stretched, she suddenly realized that she was so happy that she forgot to bolt the door. She couldn't help but stick out her tongue and quickly walked back to bolt the door. Just as she walked to the door, it was pushed open. Yong Fan suddenly poked his head in and excitedly said, "Ah, Nu, maybe I have a solution." Chapter 271. Tin Ano looked at Yong Fan blankly and asked, "What is it? What idea did you come up with?" Yong Fan slapped his forehead and said, "You see, I got too carried away." Yong Fan just said this when his eyes slid down, and he suddenly got a little carried away. Tin Ano was only wearing a small dress, a moon-white dress. There were 2 perfectly round bulges on her chest. The shape was beautiful and moderate, just like a pair of jade melons. Her collar was loose, and Yang Fan was a head taller than her as he stood at the door looking down at her. His gaze was filled with a gentle ravine. Tin Ano stood with her back to the light, so she couldn't see it very clearly. But the faint curves and ravines between the light and darkness revealed a different kind of amorous feeling in the immaturity. Yang Fan couldn't help but be moved. Tin Ano didn't notice that her appearance was exposed at the moment. She still asked in a daze, "What is it?" Yang Fan's throat made a swallowing motion, and he stuttered, Tin Ano suddenly reacted. When she looked down and saw her appearance, she quickly turned around in embarrassment and tightened her collar. Yang Fan held the door and still stood there in a daze. Tin Ano's cheeks were hot. She stamped her feet in embarrassment and said, "Get out!" Oh. Yang Fan hurriedly retreated and closed the door with a bang. When the door was closed, he saw the beautiful figure of a young girl standing with her back to him. Her loose pants accentuated her round figure that was like the bright moon. When Tin Ano heard the door close, she couldn't help but sigh in relief and feel proud. She hurriedly put on her robe and walked to the door again. After being bashful for a while, she opened the door. Yang Fan was still standing at the door. When he saw her appear, he grinned awkwardly. It could be considered a smile. In the past, when Yang Fan was in love with her, he would often take advantage of her verbally. He would even feel complacent in his heart, which was a common problem for men. But now that he knew that the girl really liked him, and he couldn't give her the promise she wanted, Yang Fan was a little timid. Tin Ano blushed and said, "Come in." Yang Fan followed behind Tin Ano and entered the room awkwardly. For a moment, he felt a little unnatural. After a moment of silence, Tin Ano cleared his throat and said, "What did you say just now? What did you think of?" Yang Fan hurriedly said, "Oh, it's like this. I'm thinking that with the 100,000 Turkic soldiers at the gates, even if reinforcements from Liangzhou arrive and divide the two fortresses of Mingwei to defend them, they might not be able to increase their strength by much and might not necessarily be able to hold the fort. After all, even though Liangzhou is under the jurisdiction of the prefectures, it is not a frontier fortress, and there aren't many soldiers there to begin with. They still need to keep a portion of their men to guard against the Tubo invading their heartland, so they won't be able to send many reinforcements." Tin Ano looked at him doubtfully and asked, "Then what do you mean?" Yang Fan touched his chin, which has been shaved with a small knife. Because it is not a specialized knife, it is not very smooth and there is some hard stubble. Yang Fan explained, "I am thinking about what General Yi Zhonglong told me during the day. The attacking Turkic army is made up entirely of cavalry. Using General Yi Zhonglong's words, they come like arrows and leave like a broken bowstring. If they want to fight, they can fight, and if they want to leave, they can leave. Therefore, whether to fight or not depends on the Turkic army. Whether we can win or not depends on the contest between the two sides. And this contest for the Turkic army is a question of whether they can win or not. What about us? There is only one choice, and that is, if the enemy wants to attack, we must hold them off." Yang Fan heaved a sigh of relief. Both sides have their own soldiers, so we have no choice but to make this choice. But I suddenly recalled that in the past, when the Turkic army attacked, we could only passively counterattack. In the future, when the Turkic army attacks, we may still have to counterattack. But this time, it is not impossible for us to take the initiative to attack. Tin Ano's interest was piqued, and she asked curiously, "What do you mean?" Yang Fan's hand gently slid up from under his chin, caressing his cheeks and touching his eyebrows, revealing a strange smile. Tin Ano's delicate body trembled, and she exclaimed, "You can't be thinking of—" Yang Fan winked at her and said with a sly smile, "Why not?" Tin Ano slowly calmed down and asked in a low voice, "What do you intend to do?" Shaking his head, Yang Fan replied, "Honestly speaking, I have not decided yet. What I have thought of is that I can make use of my looks. Mu Si became the commander-in-chief of the Turkic army, and I happen to look exactly like him, so I can make use of this. As for how to make use of this, it is not something that I can decide after thinking about it. This requires General Yi Zhong's approval and cooperation. Tin Ano softly said, "An army of 100,000 is at the gates, and you want to pretend to be Musi? This is too risky." Yang Fan replied, "When I was at Xianchuo City, I was in their lair, and it was 100 times more dangerous than now." Tin Ano softly sighed, rebuking, "Oh, must you really take such a risk?" Yang Fan solemnly replied, "I am a soldier, not a commoner on the streets preparing to flee for their lives. Many of my comrades have already died on the road to the west. Since I have the ability, shouldn't I avenge them? I am a man, and a man should make contributions. There is clearly such a good opportunity, so why should I give it up? Could it be that charging on the battlefield is not dangerous? I am a subject of the Tang dynasty, and I still have to live in the Tang dynasty. Not only do I have to live here, my children and grandchildren also have to live here. Today, I have a chance to strike at the wolves of the steppe. But if I only play it safe, won't the retribution of the butcher's knife be inflicted on my children and grandchildren in the future?" The world was now called the Great Zhou, but whether it was the subjects who did not recognize Grandma Li as the ruler or the commoners in the remote areas who did not have strict discipline, they still habitually referred to their country as the Tang dynasty. As a palace guard, Yang Fan should have paid attention to this point, but he had no such misgivings in front of Tin Ano. When Tin Ano heard him mention children and grandchildren, he very sensitively thought of himself. Could his children and grandchildren also be his children and grandchildren? To marry with him, to have children with him, to grow old together with him. When he thought of these things, Tin Ano's heart became intoxicated. She shyly retracted her brows and softly replied, "Okay, since you want to do it, I will listen to you." Neither of them noticed that Tin Ano's attitude was becoming more and more like a wife following her husband's song. The next morning, Yi Yunbao sent 4 soldiers to the courier station to find Yang Fan to escort him and Tin Ano to Liangzhou. But Yang Fan went with them to the top of the city walls. Yi Yunbao was busy on the top of the city walls. In a place like this, one could not lower his voice. At one moment, he was loudly questioning the scouts who had been sent out to scout out the Turks, and at another moment he was pointing at the auxiliary soldiers, reinforcing the city walls and yelling a few words. Several generals and deputy generals were following behind him, running around in circles under his orders. Why haven't you left yet?" Yi Yunbao turned his head to look at Yang Fan and couldn't help but ask in surprise. Yang Fan cupped his fists and said, "Palace Commander, this one suddenly thought of a plan last night that might be of some help in our counterattack against the Turkic army." "Oh, what plan did you think of?" Yi Yunbao's eyes instantly brightened. He had already asked the commanding general of Flying Fox about the entire retreat process, and was filled with admiration for Yang Fan's ability to have someone replace Su Yixing in commanding the army with a ventriloquist to stabilize the morale of the army. Not even he would have been able to do such a thing. So Yi Yunbao did not dare to treat this person's plan lightly. Yi Yunbao was rather thirsty after yelling for so long, so he invited Yang Fan into the tower. After drinking some water, he sat down and said to Yang Fan, "There's no need for so many rules. Sit down and talk. What plan do you have?" Yang Fan said to Yi Yunbao, "Yesterday, when we were talking about our encounter at Shuiyantuo City, this one said that this one and Musi's son, Musi, are extremely similar in appearance. Even though we're close relatives, it's difficult to tell them apart." Yi Yunbao's eyes brightened as he leaned forward. "What is it?" Yang Fan said, "The 2 armies of the Turks have 3 commanders, and one of them is Musi." Yi Yunbao hurriedly nodded. "That's right. You want to use this identity again." Yang Fan said, "I pretended to be Musi in the Turks to persuade the tribes, and even participated in their conference. These matters might not have been brought up on the march, but once they return, they'll notice sooner or later. At that time, I won't be able to use this identity. But it's different now. Doesn't Palace Commander think that we can use my appearance as an excuse? If someone pretends to be Musi, Yi Yunbao excitedly asked, "What do you plan to do?" Yang Fan spread his hands and said, "Palace Commander, I need to get your approval first. If you agree, then we can discuss it in detail. After all, how to deploy the troops, the surrounding geographical situation, and many other aspects, General. You are the one who knows them like the back of your hand." Yi Yunbao froze. "So you still haven't thought of a concrete plan?" Yang Fan said, "I feel that if we plan carefully, we can make use of this point." "Oh!" Yi Yunbao slowly began to pace around the tent. After some thought, he suddenly stopped and said to Yang Fan, "The Ashina tribe and the Ashina tribe just had a conflict at Shuiyantoa. The Ashina tribe even set up an ambush to kill Musi, killing many of his soldiers. Is that correct?" Yang Fan replied, "Correct. If Moshe hadn't forcefully suppressed this matter and invited a prestigious tribe leader to come and testify that Musi had been a guest at his place at the time and couldn't have pretended to be a bandit to plunder the tribes, the two sides would have already begun fighting." Yi Yunbao said, "I have a plan. What do you think?" Yang Fan's spirits rose as he hurriedly said, "General, please speak." Yi Yunbao said, "We have 2 gates here, and this mound in the middle is built between 2 mountain passes. Their 2 tribes don't get along, and this was also the reason why they split up. Once their main army arrives, they will also be responsible for 1 gate. After all, even though they have an army of 100,000, if they are all spread out in front of my gate, the majority of the people will only be able to stand back and watch. There will be no place for them to stand." Yang Fan said, "Correct." Yi Yunbao smiled. "Since that's the case, what if this general gives you a group of soldiers dressed as Turks and pretending to be Musi to launch a sneak attack on the Ashina camp and incite them to kill each other? What do you think?" Yang Fan was dumbfounded. He had always felt that this palace commander Yi was an extremely shrewd person, but he hadn't expected him to come up with such a lousy idea. Chapter 272. Yi Yunbao rubbed his palms together and said, "If you pretend to be Musi, you will definitely provoke a fierce battle between the 2 sides. Then, our Ming Empire will send out 2 armies to kill them all." Yang Fan looked at him and spent a great deal of effort to hide his expression as if he was looking at an idiot. He asked, "When the Turks reach the city, I will disguise myself as Musi and leave the city and attack Ashid's tribe from Musi's camp?" Yi Yunbao was a soldier and instinctively wanted to attack and fight. Only after hearing Yang Fan's words did he realize that something was wrong. He frowned and said, "That's right. This is a problem. It doesn't matter if we sneak out a few people and directly open the gates to attack, but—" He stroked his beard and thought for a moment before saying, "When the Turks reach the city, they will definitely camp outside the 2 gates. If we send a group of soldiers out of the city, we will have to move under the noses of Mu-En and Musi without alarming them and then disguise ourselves as them to attack Ashid's tribe. This is somewhat difficult." He paced around twice before his eyes suddenly lit up. "What if you take a group of soldiers out of the city and set up an ambush before they surround the city? Their army of 100,000 consumes a lot of rations every day and won't stop at Flying Fox Pass. They will probably attack the city in the next few days. You only need to bring 10 days of rations." Yang Fan saw that Yi Yunbao's thoughts were still stuck on the idea of using his appearance to attack. He tactfully said, "It is not impossible for me to bring a group of soldiers out of the city and hide in the wilderness. But that way, I will only be able to attack the enemy's rear. An army of 100,000 is pressing down on the city, and setting up camp is 10 li away. Our soldiers are limited to begin with, and we still have to defend the city. I can't bring too many people out. If we engage the rear of the Turks, we will be separated by more than 10 li. Will our side be able to respond in time? Moreover, our army is right in front of us. Will Ashid's tribe attack Ashid's tribe at this time? Their leader is not an idiot. This method won't work." Yi Yunbao frowned. "That's right. This method is indeed full of flaws. but your appearance is similar to Musi's. Now that you've reminded me, I think I can make use of it. Since that's the case, don't leave for now. Stay in the courier hostel for now. Let me think of a way." Yi Yinbao thought for 3 days. 3 days later, the Turks attacked the city. Zhu Tu led his army and finally arrived. Meanwhile, the Mun kingdom had also manufactured some siege weapons. When they arrived, they had brought along the crucial components of the siege weapons. At this moment, they were only cutting wood to make some thick supports and levers. Therefore, the craftsmen produced a batch of them quickly. Both sides didn't stop for a second and immediately launched their attacks. Mingwei garrison was actually 2 fortresses. To be specific, one was called Mingwei, and the other was called Wuwen. Together, they were called White Pavilion. Between the 2 garrisons was a steep, rocky mountain with a city wall built on it. Putting aside the fact that it was winter, they only needed to pour some water down from the mountain to make the walls as slippery as ice, making them impossible to climb. Even in the heat of summer, it was impossible to climb up such a steep mountain. A small garrison was more than enough to deal with them, so the Turks would not attack from here. Their attack route could only be through the 2 frontier fortresses, Mingwei and Wuwen. These 2 fortresses were connected to the rocky mountain in the middle. On their left and right sides were the desert and some mountain ridges of the Helan Mountains. If they wanted to enter Longyu and directly take Liangzhou, they had to pass through these 2 fortresses. The 2 small cities of the Tang army relied on the fortifications of the fortresses and mountains to fortify their defenses. They relied on the danger to defend themselves and acted as horns to each other. Huge stones were used to block the city gate. Many backup weapons were piled up on the side of the horse track. Rolling logs and stones were scattered all over the city wall. The disc fort, the arrow tower, and the city gate were all heavily guarded. It looked impregnable. Below the city walls, the Turkic army stretched for 10 miles. Looking down from the city walls, they were so densely packed that one could not see the end of them. Yurts, groups of cavalry galloping back and forth, fluttering flags, and a forest of spears and halberds emitted a vast killing aura towards the top of the city walls. What was especially frightening were the huge stone catapults, moving arrow towers and battering rams. This type of catapult was purely pulled by manpower. It required more than 200 people to use it, but the Turks used war horses to replace manpower. A few dozen war horses were enough to make 1 catapult work. When the Tang army fought against Goguryeo, they also used this type of catapult and caused great damage to the simple and crude Goguryeo stronghold. This type of catapult first appeared in the Warring States period. Therefore, the Turks learned how to build and use it very early on. It could launch more than 300 caddies of stones at once. These 2 fortresses were built on the mountains. Even though there were no stones to be used in the desert and grasslands, there were plenty at the foot of the mountains. Even though it was not easy to gather large stones, but if more than 300 caddies of stones were to be thrown up, even though it would not cause much damage to the city walls, the damage to the defending troops would be multiplied. There were also catapults and ballistae installed in the city walls. But compared to the Turkic army, one was a fixed target while the other was a moving target. Obviously, the killing effect of the catapults was not as effective. The war drums above the city walls thundered and bugles sounded below the city walls. At the same time, a war broke out in Wuhan and Mingwei. Stones flew in the air. On the top of the city walls, golden kerosene, rolling logs and stones fought against a dense rain of arrows. Flowing flames, rolling stones, arrows piercing through the air, and corpses littered the ground. Fresh blood stained the top of the city walls and the ground. Broken ladders, battering rams, and trench bridges were scattered on the ground. Yang Fan and Tin Ano stood in the watchtower and frowned as they looked at everything in front of them. The ones attacking this side were the Mun kingdom and Musi's army. As Ashid's great Yabga's army had just arrived after a long journey and was exhausted, the main focus of the attack was on the Mun kingdom. They fought fiercely, and one part of the city wall was breached by a few ladders and flying ladders. Under the cover of the rain of arrows, the Turkic army climbed up the city wall and charged in with all their might. As long as they could occupy one point, they would soon be able to occupy the entire city. Yi Yunbao, who was fully dressed in military uniform, commanded from the outside. He transferred a reserve team over to quickly clear the Turkic army that had climbed up the city wall and pushed the ladders away. Then, barrels of kerosene, wooden logs, and rolling stones were transported over. Tin Ano suddenly looked into the distance and pointed. "Look over there!" Yang Fan looked over and saw a watchtower erected in the middle of the Turkic camp. It was 3 zhang higher than the city wall, and several people were standing on the watchtower, observing the deployment of the defenders and the situation of the battle. From here, the people on the watchtower were only small figures. Even their robes could not be seen clearly, much less their faces. Yang Fan said, "Those standing on the watchtower should be Mu-En, Muzi, and the Turkic commanders." Tin Ano glanced at him and asked, "You are still thinking of that idea?" Yang Fan replied, "I feel that this idea can be used, but I can't think of how to use it." Yang Fan pointed at a soldier on the wall. His comrade had died in battle, and he alone could not move the wooden logs. The other soldiers did not have time to fill in the gaps. Seeing a Turkic soldier climbing up the ladder, he could only give up on the wooden logs, grab his saber, and charge over. Yang Fan said, "I'm just like him now. I clearly have a powerful weapon in my hand that can kill a large number of people with just one swing, but I have no way of using it. In the end, I can only fight like this." Standing beside him, Tin Ano stole a glance at him and coughed, explaining, "I thought that Shinmu was with you, so I followed you to the Turks. When you were pretending to be Muzi at Shwe, Yentoa, I saw that by your side there was a Turkic girl." Yang Fan was still racking his brains on how to use his looks to deal with the Turks. Hearing her mention Muhiwe, he recalled that unusually charming scene and felt guilty. He hurriedly pretended to be calm and replied, "Yes, she is the daughter of the commander of this Turkic army, Mu-En, Musi's fiancée." "Oh," Tin Ano said, "she didn't notice that you are a fake." Yang Fan laughed and said, "How is that possible? I don't have much contact with her." Tin Ano said, "Isn't she and Muzi already engaged? The grasslands do not have as many rules as the Central Plains. She did not have any intimate actions with you, Muzi?" Yang Fan's mind suddenly flashed with the many erotic images of the galloping ox cart. He hurriedly said, "Of course not. Miss Yue is different from other grassland girls. Her father is the chief of the Mwaha tribe. She married Muzi clearly so that her father Muen and Muzi's father Moshe could form an alliance. It was for this reason that they were engaged." Tin Ano waited for a moment, but he did not continue. She could not help but ask, "Is it because of this reason?" After she finished asking, she still did not receive an answer from Yang Fan. She could not help but turn her head to look at him. She saw that Yang Fan was staring at the battlefield in front of him without saying a word. She could not help but ask worriedly, "What is it?" Yang Fan slowly said, "Don't say anything. Let me think. I think I have an idea." Yang Fan quietly thought for a while, then said, "I think I have a way to make them retreat." Tin Ano asked in surprise, "What way?" Yang Fan said, "The queen of the Ashina tribe of the Turks has always been chosen from the Ashina tribe. This is because the Ashina tribe is the strongest Turkic tribe besides the Ashina tribe. Their marriage is to form an alliance." Tin Ano said, "That's right." Yang Fan said, "The Turkic Khagan Gudulu is seriously ill. This time, it is very likely that he will not be able to hold on. His younger brother Moshe wants to obtain the position of Khagan, and the Ashina tribe will definitely stand on the side of Gudulu's son because they are related by marriage. In this way, Moshe has no choice but to seek outside help. He has chosen the third strongest tribe, second only to the Ashina and Ashina tribes, the Mu-En tribe, to form an alliance with him. And then I think I know the purpose of his army this time. First, he wants to win a great battle and strengthen his reputation for the position of Khagan. Second, he wants to find an excuse to mobilize the main forces of the Ashina tribe to prevent them from interfering in his bid for the position of Khagan. And then, several stray arrows flew over and nailed into the window frame beside the two of them. However, the two of them stood there quietly, neither of them moving. Yang Fan turned to face Teneno and said with a smile, "There is no need to send anyone out of the city. I only need to pretend to be Musi and spread the news that Gudulu is dead, Moshe has seized the throne, and the Ashina tribe is squeezing out Gudulu's tribe. Then their army of 100,000 will immediately retreat." Chapter 273. Yang Fan smiled at Teneno and asked, "What do you think of my idea?" "What if Musi can't speak?" Teneno pulled out her sword, and with a flash of cold light, an arrow that was about to run out of strength was slashed away by her sword. Her sword returned to its sheath with a cha sound. Her movements were clean and elegant, deliberately revealing military secrets to others. With this sentence, the actions of pulling out the sword, slashing the arrow, and returning the sword were done in one go. Her speed and tone of voice were completely normal. Yang Fan said he only needs to show his face. The specific words can be done by the people around him, just like when I pretended to be him and plundered the Turkic tribes. Teneno said, "Then how can you be sure that he still can't speak?" Yang Fan said, "Wouldn't it be better if he could speak? I only want to learn a few simple sentences of Turkic language. What's so difficult about that?" Teneno said, "Have you heard his voice before? Are you sure that the people who heard you have not heard Musi speak before?" Yang Fan was startled and said, "This of course not. But when I left the Turkic tribes, he still couldn't speak. He shouldn't be able to speak now, right?" As Yang Fan said this, he couldn't help but look into the distance. There was a tall watchtower there, and there were a few figures on it. The watchtower was very tall, even taller than the top of the city wall. This was the wilderness, and standing on the watchtower, the north wind whistled, biting cold. The people on the second floor were all wearing wolfskin jackets, wolfskin pants, cowhide boots, dogskin hoods to cover their ears, and large woolen cloaks. They were all wrapped up tightly. Mu-En and Musi were on the watchtower. Of course, they could afford to wear expensive fur coats. But expensive fur coats had long lost their purpose of keeping warm and had become a symbol of status. Therefore, the leather was tailored to be elegant and luxurious, completely ignoring the function of blocking the wind and keeping out the cold. Wearing such a fur coat here, as long as there was a small gap in the neck, the cold wind would rush in, even if wrapped in a sea dragon fur coat. On the other hand, the wolf skin was not any worse than the sea dragon skin. It was just that it wasn't as durable. If we were able to take down the 5,000 Tang soldiers in the flying foxmouth, they would have a hard time using their military power if we were to attack the Ming Wei garrison. Unfortunately, I think the reinforcements from Liangzhou will arrive soon. In this way, we still have to exhaust their forces before we can break through the city. The one who spoke was Mu-En. His voice came from under the thick scarf, and it was still loud and powerful. His face was also covered with a scarf, revealing only a pair of eyes. The upper edge of the scarf was covered with a layer of frost because of the heat dissipating. His eyebrows were also covered with a layer of frost, and his pair of cold eyes revealed an awe-inspiring murderous aura. Next to him, a man in the same attire, with a scarf covering his face, said something in a hoarse voice. His voice was not only hoarse, but also rough and unpleasant, like the sound of gravel rubbing against each other. It was very uncomfortable to hear, but no one heard what he said. His voice was too low and hoarse, and once it left his mouth, it was blown away by the wind. Mu-En frowned, turned his head, and asked, "What did you say?" That person turned around and pulled off the scarf with his back to the wind. It was actually Musi. It was unknown whether Yen Jiha's deceptive herbal fragrant ash could really cure diseases, or if Muzi's voice was not completely destroyed. After his injuries gradually healed, he could really speak. However, his voice had become low and unpleasant, like an old ghost whispering into your ear at midnight. Mu-En was very worried whether his precious daughter would still like him. Back then, it was his beautiful love song that moved her heart. Otherwise, even though the marriage was for the benefit of the tribe, Muzi had a few sons, and Muzi was not the most valued one. Why would he choose Muzi as his son-in-law? Muzi said in a low and hoarse voice, "We have enough troops to not give them time to breathe. Everyone take turns to fight day and night. We must attack as soon as possible." The wind was very strong, and Muzi's ghostly voice was really too low and hoarse. Even though Mu-En listened carefully, some of his words were still muffled. However, he had already understood Muzi's meaning. Gudulu's illness was too serious. It was completely unpredictable whether or not he could last through this winter. If Gudulu had already passed away, and they had not returned with a full load from the Han people's territory, then this operation would not only be unable to play the role of strengthening Muzi's prestige, it would not even be able to play the role of icing on the cake. It would completely lose the meaning of sending troops. Mu-En nodded in understanding. "Tonight, your troops will be the first to attack the city." Muzi nodded forcefully. He looked at the top of Mingwei's city wall with a fiery gaze. He could speak, but it was even more uncomfortable than when he could not speak. This ghostly voice, if not necessary, he did not want to speak at all. He hated the Ashid tribe, hated Jutu and Xiao Mumu to death. He was even more worried that he would lose his originally unfavored position among the brothers because of this. Therefore, he desired a great victory more than ever. He stared at the top of the city wall, wishing that he could climb up and plant his battle flag on the top of the city wall. However, he did not expect that there was a person standing on top of the city wall, plotting against him. The fierce battle on the city wall had entered a white-hot state. On some of the crevasses, the soldiers were already engaged in a melee with the enemy. Below the city wall, scaling ladders had been placed on top of the city wall, and the Turkic soldiers were climbing up like ants. Kerosene, rolling logs, and boulders were madly smashing down, each one smashing down like dumplings. Those scaling ladders had also been knocked down by the battering poles, or ignited by the burning oil. Only 1/10 of them remained standing firmly at the edge of the city wall. But even if there was only one person climbing the city wall, it was still a very tense matter. They had to be suppressed immediately. A dam of 1,000 li could collapse with an ant's nest. A small gap could be fatal. The grassland warriors were skilled in riding and archery, and they excelled at fighting on horseback. Galloping on horseback, that kind of fighting style suited the taste of the fierce and untamed Turkic people the most. Sieging a city was not their forte, but the valiance and bravery in their bones made up for it. Even though it was extremely strenuous for them to attack the city from the back, they howled and charged up the city wall, as if they were completely indifferent to their own lives. This was a pack of wolves roaming the grassland. However, the Tang soldiers who had gone through professional training were no longer farmers carrying hoes. Especially these professional soldiers who were stationed at the border and dealt with the enemy all year round. Their valiance and bravery were not inferior to their enemies. Fierce attacks, fierce battles, heads were cut off, blood was splattered, and the soldiers on both sides were fighting with their lives on the line. "Commander, the reinforcements have arrived." Yi Yunbao was commanding at the top of the city wall when a bodyguard suddenly ran over excitedly to report. Yi Yunbao roared, "Tell them to send reinforcements immediately when they're here. Damn it, the house is on fire. Do I still have to go and greet them personally?" The bodyguard mumbled, "Supervisor Liu has come personally." Yi Yunbao did not even turn his head. He pointed to a platoon and said, "Where's the gold juice? Go and collect some more from each household. That stuff can't be easily healed if it burns on the body." "What? Who's here?" The bodyguard said, "Commander, the governor of the Huyuan Road, General Liu Shirda, has personally arrived with his troops. Ah! Yi Yunbao turned his head. His movement was too violent and his neck cracked. He exclaimed in shock, "General Liu is here? Lin Zhongbao, come here." Lin Zhongbao, the left commander of the Ming Wei garrison, ran over with a bloody saber in hand. He was the left commander of the Ming Wei garrison and Yi Yunbao's deputy. The two had always been close and were like brothers. Because their names had the word leopard in them, they were known as the two leopards of Mingwei. Yi Yunbao said, "General Liu is here. I'll go and greet him. You take command here and don't make any mistakes. Otherwise, General Liu will think that we're useless." Lin Zhongbao loudly said, "Don't worry and go. Leave this place to me." Yi Yunbao spat a few times and cursed. "Where am I going? What a disheartening thing to say." Saying this, he hurriedly led a few of his bodyguards down the city wall. This time, Lu Shirda had personally led reinforcements to the Ming Wei garrison. As the commander-in-chief of Longyu, Lu Shirda had originally been stationed in Shanzhou. After the Turkic spies escaped, they had taken important military intelligence with them. So Lu Shirda was not worried that the Turks would seize the opportunity to attack the strategic pass on the border and might even succeed. The few fortresses are more than 1,000 miles away from each other. The entire Longyu and Hushi regions have been oppressed by the Turks and Tubo into a narrow strip of land. It is impossible for him to choose a perfect location to command and take care of all the fortresses. However, he is truly worried and he needs to make a decision. In truth, no matter where the Turks chose to attack, there would always be advantages and disadvantages. Lu Shirda had no way of knowing which place the Turks would choose, so he could only choose the most important place. In the end, he chose the White Pavilion. Liaochuan was too far away from Shanzhou, beyond Lu Shirda's reach. If the Turks could really break through the pass, by the time he arrived with his army, everything that could be looted would have been stolen, and everyone that could be killed would have already been killed. Among the remaining forts, he was not too worried about Dunko. Dunko was relatively more dangerous, and it was close to the center of the Tang dynasty, making it convenient for reinforcements. Moreover, it was the territory of the Shuafang border army, and he did not have the authority to interfere even if he wanted to. The remaining two places were Juyanhai and Baiting. The Longyu region was a narrow strip sandwiched between the Turks and Tubo. It was shaped like a gourd, and Gan province and Liangzhou were the two concave parts of the gourd. Moreover, Liangzhou was the mouth of the gourd. If it was lost, the Turks could use it to attack the central plains from the east, and the entire Longyu region of Hushi would be in danger of falling. This was the most important place in the western regions, so he wanted to personally guard Liangzhou. After Lu Shirda sent off Qiu Shinji and Wang Xiajia, who came from the west, to investigate the military, he immediately set off for Liangzhou. He had just arrived at Liangzhou when the signal from Mingwei reached there. Thus, Lu Shirda decided to personally lead 10,000 reinforcements to Mingwei. Yang Fan saw the scene of Yi Yunbao hurriedly walking down the city gate tower. Lin Zhongbao stood at the top of the city wall and loudly cheered for the soldiers, saying that the reinforcements had arrived. He also heard that General Liu had personally come to Mingwei garrison. He didn't expect that Shen Mu would actually come as well,